Everybody, a special welcome to three in politics, and they're from don't we all? They're from Northamptonshire, Northampton High School. So welcome, girls. I hope you enjoy it. A fire drill is not due this morning, but in again. Apologies received from councillors unable to attend. First of all, from Councillor Patel.
Mr. Chairman, I have three apologies. Councillor Amy Howard, Rebecca Breeze and Adil Sadigov.
Thank you. Councillor McGee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Brookfield will be late, and apologies from Councillor McCutcheon.
Thank you. And Councillor Stamborough.
Both of us are here, Chair.
Thank you very much. All right, is it your wish, members, that you approve the council minutes of the previous meeting in November? All agreed? Is that a yes? Yes. Thank you. I'll sign a minute in a second. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Can you put your mic on?
Are we not having prayers as we have our earnest minister here?
We are indeed having prayers, yes. Thank you for bringing that point up. I went straight to the minutes first, which is what is in the list, actually. Right, I would welcome my man, as they say, for the year, and ask him to lead us in prayers, and to also say, if anybody doesn't wish to take part, can they please leave now? Thank you, Graham. If you could lead us in prayers, could we please stand?
Pay to all what is due to them, taxes to whom taxes are due, revenue to whom revenue is due, respect to whom respect is due, honour to whom honour is due. Owe nothing to anyone except to love one another, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. Eternal God, fount and source of all authority and wisdom, hear our prayer for all who govern. Give to Elizabeth, our Queen, grace as the symbol of loyalty and unity for all our peoples. And give to our county council wisdom and skill, imagination and energy, vision, understanding and integrity, that all may live in peace and happiness, truth and prosperity in our county. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Graham. And as always, if you wish to stay, do so, but I'm sure you have other things to do. Notification of members of the public wishing to speak. We have several. Mr. Dean Smith, who is the County Commissioner for Northampton Scouts, Mr. Alvarez Wilkinson from Unison, Mr. Paul Croft, Mrs. Penny Smith, Mr. Tony Banks, and on item 7, Mrs. Alison Richards. So, at the appropriate time, they will be called. Declarations of interest by councillors. I'm sure you all realise how important it is to declare your interest. So anybody wishes to declare any interest now may do so. If not, you can declare an interest at the appropriate time. Chairman's announcements. I'm sure you're aware, if you're not, of the sad death of District Councillor Ian Young, who represented the Malton Division between 1985 and 1997. He was chairman of the Planning and Transport Committee and was an inaugural member on behalf of the Council on the East Midlands Regional Planning Forum. And he also liked tennis. I'm going to invite Judy Shepherd to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Former Councillor Ian Young was a tall, lanky, charming Scot born in Ayrshire who became a county councillor for the Malton Division in 1985 and served for many years. In his time, he served on the Environment and Transport Committee, the Police Authority, and later became Deputy Leader. He died on October the 25th in Dollar, Scotland, following a series of strokes, and leaves behind Moira, his wife, 3 daughters and 5 grandchildren. And during his earlier life, he served in the Royal Navy and then became a director of Engelbart, which is a petroleum company specialising in chemicals and food. Ian has a lot to answer for because he actually recruited me in 1997 and to follow on in his footsteps, which I gladly did. I'd like to, I'm sure you will actually join with me and send our condolences to his family. Thank you.
Thank you for reminding me to switch the mic on. Could you all stand for a minute's silence, please? Thank you. We have a few more announcements. In fact, we have more announcements than we seem to have business today. Sorry? Flying the flag. Flying the flag, yes. Can I remind everybody that we're flying the flag for Commonwealth Day on the 11th of March. I am told, because I have never attended yet as a county councillor, I'm told that it's very poorly attended. So if there are some county councillors around at that day, could they come outside the county hall? It'll only take a little while and demonstrate that we are showing and flying the flag, and councillors are there to represent the council. Civic dinner takes place on the 29th of March, as you're aware. A lot of people have bought tickets and we need a few more. And please, opposition councillors, if we haven't got any from you yet, if it's possible, we'd be grateful to see you. There's no politics in the civic dinner, but it would be nice to see some of you there, please. And I'm sure that there's some officers that are coming as well. In line with legislation that came into effect on 2014, all decisions on the budget will be subject to a recorded vote. You should have all found copies of the process for the budget meeting today on your chairs this morning, but I will briefly summarise how we will proceed. First of all, members of the public will be invited to address the Council. Number 2, the administration will move the budget as recommended by the Cabinet. Number 3, the budget will be seconded. I will then ask the Labour Group to make a statement on the budget. And then next, I will then ask the Liberal Democrat Group to present an amendment and make a statement on the budget. It is only at this point that any further amendments can be moved, seconded and debated. This can only be done if Standing Orders 15.6, A, B and C and 15.7 are suspended. So if there are any further amendments, I will ask Council to vote on the suspension of the standing orders I have just referred to before moving on. The amendments and the substantive motion will have a recorded vote. That's by law now. Should there be no further amendments, I will open the debate on the substantive motion and will be the administration's budget and any amendment to it that might have been agreed during the previous debates. The proposer of the administration's budget will have the right to reply before I call a recorded vote on the budget. I hope that's clear to all of you, and please refer to the notes left on your chairs this morning for any further clarification. We now move on to item 6. Before I invite the public to speak on this item, I would like to ask everyone to respect each other with no shouting from the public, gallery or councillors whilst people speak. No whistle blowing, cheering, clapping, whatever, over the top of speakers. I'm sure that won't happen because we're all dignified in this chamber. But I feel it's only fair that everyone has a chance to make their points freely and without disruption from anyone else. Yes, you're dead right. And I did say that under Chairman's announcements, which I'm going to briefly say as well, that I would ask Councillor Chowan to talk about a sleep-in that is happening. So, Councillor Chowan.
Thank you. We have sleep-ins every day. This is about a sleep-out. So I'd just like to ask everyone for support for a sleep-out that me and some of the other councillors are doing on the 1st of March. It's for Project 1615. There's a gentleman by the name of Stan Robertson who goes out and feeds the homeless in Northampton every morning. And he approached me to ask whether I could support him with this project. So we've got Councillor Victoria Perry, Councillor Rumins and Adam Brown that will also be joining in as well. So we have some sponsorship forms and just ask whether the councillors can support us in raising funds for this event. I thought we'd announce this before the craziness starts. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I forgot you. I wrote it down on a different piece of paper. I do apologise for calling it sleep-in, but when you get to my age, it's a sleep-in. When you get to your age, Councillor, it's a sleep-out. You're a lot younger. You can do it. Right, I'm going to invite the following members of the public to address the Council. First of all, Mr. Dean Smith. Each member of the public will have 3 minutes. Now today, because we have so many speakers to speak, I will be very strict on the 3 minutes. I will remind you after 2 minutes, and after 3 minutes I shall ask you to please stop. So Mr. Dean Smith, who's County Commissioner for Northampton Scouts, you have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much. Councillors, Dean Smith, I think some of you know me as this process has evolved. I'm the County Commissioner. I'm actually just one of over 2,300 adult volunteers that work with Northamptonshire Scouts, a significant number of people. My role here this morning, formally, is to ask you to follow the Cabinet's advice, direction, and not to remove the community use of schools budget. I'm led to believe that that will occur. So that takes me to the second point, which is a genuine thank you. Because to get to this point, the Cabinet needed to make that recommendation. But prior to that, your Oversight and Scrutiny Committee, after grilling me for somewhere in the region of 35 minutes, did decide that that one should be pushed back and thought about it again. Your own consultation process, with over 900 responses, well, 227 25% of all the responses that came in came from us. But actually, it still goes even further, because there are a number of you in this chamber who, right from the process starting in the middle of December, I've had personal conversations with, I've had meetings with, I'm not going to name you, don't worry, and received an awful lot of support. And that was cross-party, which was even more encouraging from our perspective. We touched a nerve. You helped us through this process. And I'd like to extend a very personal thank you to every single one of you. We engaged in the democratic process. On the basis of that, I cancelled the 200 kids that were coming outside. I cancelled the campfire, because trust me, after the 10th rendition of Ginganguli, you would have agreed to anything. We entered into a process. We're Scouts, so we invented a badge, Scouting for Democracy. Councillor Hughes has a sufficient real badges for every single one of you as a memento of this engagement. Please take one, because we're proud of what we did. Actually, we're proud of the democratic processes in Northamptonshire.
16 seconds.
We look forward to, one way or the other, unitary councils. Some of you, I guess, will become unitary councillors. I guess. Please remember, when you're having this consultation again and discussion,
can you finish, please?
The brilliant job that my leaders are doing this year is the brilliant job they'll be doing next year and the year after and the year after. Thank you very much. And a final point, for those of you that don't become unitary councillors, we're always looking for good volunteers. Thank you.
Thank you. I compliment you on your speech. Mr. Alvarez Wilkinson from Unison. And if Mr. Paul Crofts could get ready as the next speaker. Thank you, sir. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Hello, I'm here today representing Unison to ask for the Council to do the decent thing and support an amendment to pay a cost of living increase to NCC staff on behalf of Unison members. You will recall that Max Caller, in his report, stated that staff were not at fault for the financial mismanagement and continue to provide a good service to the county in very difficult circumstances. Over the past decade, from 2010, the rise in the cost of living has been a cumulative of 26.1%. Staff pay increases over the same period has been 4.6%. The recent announcement of the relaxation of the punitive sick pay policy has to be welcomed, and the administration talks about a new start for the NCC. But for the staff group, the lack of incremental pay, the imposition of unpaid leave, the reneging on promises to pay the PADP increment, and now the lack of a cost of living increase for the second year running makes it look like the same old story. When NCC removed its staff from national terms and conditions in 2013, Unison repeatedly warned this would make us uncompetitive in the labour market. Our contention is this has been vindicated with our problems not only in recruitment, but also with the retention of staff. One social worker we spoke to has been here for 7 years and only receives £800 a year more than a newly qualified staff appointed yesterday. It's not the way to keep people. Many of the problems identified by Max Caller were issues Unison had raised at the time, only to be ignored. The lesson is to listen to your staff. With staff having to pay the 5% increase in council tax themselves, with added parking charges for the staff, some concern under inadequate catering facilities and toilets, and with the fuel costs seeking to rise by 10% soon, staff are now fed up with bailing out NCC and need a pay rise. With £20 million in the unallocated revenue reserve, our contention is that an extra £2.1 million does not need to go into a contingency fund, but should be paid as a pay rise to staff, in recognition of their contributions staff have made to keeping the NCC boat afloat, and as a gesture of good faith that NCC does want to establish good relations with their staff again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Paul Crofts.
He's not here, so we will go for the
He's
next
not here. Right. So Mrs. Penny-Smith then. Thank you.
Good morning, Council. I expect most of you thought I wouldn't be here again, but there you are, proverbial bad penny. I do have to say I was a bit perplexed yesterday when I was supposed to be like Mystic Meg and understand what other questions had already been asked by members of the public. So I've had to change my question. And so my question is, how are you tying this in with your council plan? Your council plan in the papers today talk about how your vision of Northamptonshire and how you want to make it best for all your residents that live here. But over 95% of your staff are residents, and how does not giving them a pay rise make you fulfil these points that you've got on your plan? I'm just a bit perplexed by that too. Your December budget balanced, or so you said, and now you've got extra money. You've told me time and time again that staff are your best asset. Why aren't you rewarding them? Why aren't you using contingency money to help your beleaguered staff? Surely they matter as much as everybody else in your individual electorates, that they should have a decent way of life in Northamptonshire, and yet it's their employer that is the worst in this county. And for that, I need you to have a look and see how you tie in your treatment of staff with your plan, because it's really important. And in case you're wondering, yes, I am still a member of staff, and yes, it matters not just to me, but to other colleagues. It really matters that when you talk about how wonderful Northamptonshire is going to be, you don't make it wonderful for your staff. And that, I think, is appalling. So I think you need to look deep within your own souls, your own conscience, if you've got one, and some doubt that, I know. But you need to have a look and see whether or not that contingency money would be best giving your staff a quality of life. Not a better one, because what they've got at the moment is not sustainable, but to give your staff what they truly deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tony Banks. Thank you, sir. You have 3 minutes. It's work. No, it was on.
Is it on?
Yes,
yep.
it's on.
Good. Excellent. This budget won't make up for the millions stolen by Tory austerity, by local zealots and fantasists who ran this council, ran the council. Precisely the same people run the council now, except for Heather Smith, who you decided was the scapegoat that you would
Mr. Chairman,
carry the can.
I refuse to sit here and be accused of being a zealot and all those other words this gentleman says. I think if we can be accused of anything, sir, it's doing our very best to put the finances and the services of this county council in the best place we possibly can. That is the commitment that I and my members have made. I'm not going to sit here and take that. I respect the view and that we're a democracy here and we listen to the points raised by public, but I'm not going to be sitting here and take words like that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Through the chair, thank you very much.
Chair,
no, before you...
Point of order, please. Point of order.
I'm sorry. If it is a point of order, which point of order is it?
Sorry, but under
is this all part of my 3 minutes?
Councillor Golby raising, because this is not on.
That's not a point of order.
Well,
I'm sorry, but he was quite right to raise that. We don't have criticism of people like that. people of staff and individual criticism.
Yeah,
that is not fair. They are not current people that you're talking about. The current people are completely different from from previous people. There's only 2 people that remain. So can you continue now, please?
Yes. Thanks. I'm addressing all of you who were elected in 2017, I believe, and I believe you're the same people who were elected in 2017, and many of you were also here before that as well. I think probably a majority. That being so, is it really credible that that you can be trusted with making 5% increases in council tax and spending the money responsibly? How many times do we have to we, the people of Northamptonshire, have to bail you out while services are simultaneously slashed? Year on year we've had cuts and slashed services. How many more times, and these are my questions, how many more times will Section 114 notices take the place of responsible, decent budgets? Tories gave the game away before Christmas when they in fact voted to continue austerity. That was the outcome of your last council meeting. You decided to continue it when Labour had put a motion forward to say things could be different, they could be better. But you want to carry on slashing. The only realistic solutions are, firstly, that the Tory government make good what was taken away from Northampton taxpayers. And secondly, those responsible are banned from public office. That means that you shouldn't be allowed to reboot yourselves as leaders of the new authorities. Thanks very much for listening.
Right, I now invite, can you please be quiet, Councillor Malcolm Longley to move the budget. He has a maximum of 45 minutes to do so if you're not aware.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. I don't expect to take 45 minutes, so you'll be pleased to hear.
I'm sure you won't, Councillor Longley.
Well, I'm going to speak from here. I'm sure everybody can hear me fine. Okay, so I'll proceed. This is the first budget that I've ever been fortunate enough to present, I think it's probably fair to say. And, sorry, can you not hear? Modification. Everybody hear me now? Yes. Okay. Right, well, this is the first budget I've ever had to present here in the council. I've done quite a few elsewhere. I thought I'd start by welcoming the 3 young ladies up there who come down here, got an interest in politics. And when I first became a councillor, I joined up, as it were, because I thought it would be interesting. That was a few years ago. And I'm bound to tell you that it's been very interesting. And here I am now. First of all, I'm going to lay down a few of the themes that will go through this budget, and I hope you'll recognise them as we go through them. First of all, it's been devised by a large number of people. This isn't my budget. This is a very large number of people, a lot of them in this room. But in particular, they've been involved some very, very talented officers, both NCC and some from outside as well. And of course, we've got our commissioners been involved, giving us good guidance there. So it's been very much a team effort. And one of the underlying themes, the key theme here, is that we are determined, all of us, all those involved in it, I'm sure you would all agree with this, determined to pass on the very best financial position that we can devise to the new organisation. And I'm sure nobody's going to disagree with that. I would hope not, certainly. It sets out the basis for ongoing and continuing improvement based on a very well thought through, I think, transformation strategy and primarily around productivity and improvements. It's not a slash and burn, it's a productivity basis. Now, we're looking to maintain, improve services, while financially being sustainable. Now, this morning, I'm not going to drone on through many, many numbers, because I'm quite sure you've all read the report in detail. And if you haven't, then I suggest you do, because I'm not going to drone on with a lot of numbers. I'll start off with a backdrop to this budget. And I'm going to start with a brief overview of the current situation and where we've come from over the last few years. A number of you will be familiar with that. For the period up to the 2017-18 budget, any overspend that we had, if indeed that happened, was covered by reserves, unallocated reserves, and culminating in the eventual inevitability that we would run out of reserves. And so, to maintain services, and that was the motivation, capital receipts were used. That is, the sale of assets was used to, was considered the only really viable option. And so that was done. Now, during that financial year, the then 151 officer, who has since left us, issued a 114 notice. Now, you're familiar with that, I'm sure. And in May 2018, a number of commissioners were appointed, and the use of capital receipts for that purpose was terminated. So, that action left us with a 39.7 million deficit in that year. Big number. And that was unfunded. So we had a 39.7 million unfunded deficit, and that is the financial year 2017-18. That is the year before this one, so not very long ago. In addition, the proposed use of 30 million worth of capital receipts in our current financial year was disallowed, leaving us with a starting position of minus 30 million. Not a very good start. So with a combination of reduced central funding, budget pressures, and the inability to use capital receipts, that left us a pretty big mountain to climb, as you well might imagine. There's still a little bit of 17-18 hanging around, as it were. We've got to sign off the final accounts to the auditors. That's undergoing at the moment. It's looking quite positive, so I'm expecting to wrap that up fairly promptly, but that's still outstanding. So I move on to 2018-19. That is our current year. And the initial forecast we started off with indicated a deficit of 64.1 million. Good start. And so a second 114 notice was issued in July 18th. Now that was 7 months ago. Again, very short period of time. Seemed a long time, but it wasn't. We had a new CEO, here on my right, and a 151 officer appointed, hiding somewhere over there. And I was going to make a bit of joke about a posse of commissioners, but I was told off about that. So a team of commissioners, as I modified it to, and a revamped cabinet. So you've got essentially a new team, right or wrong. Now, in August, this council, the majority of people here in this room, agreed a set of core values. You all remember that? By which NCC would be guided. And we've done our very best to do just that. And at that time, of course, despite the general view, I don't think anybody thought that we had much of a hope of squaring the circle, as it were. Anyway, numerous plans devised, most famous being the October Stabilisation Plan. You all remember that one, I'm sure. But it was not the only one. There was one after another. And you may recall we spoke about Plan Bs and things, well, more like CDs and E's and F's, I think is fair to say. Anyway, in July, the deficit, or the year-end outlook, as I usually refer to it as, was 30.1 million negative. That was the outlook at the end of July last year. But I can report to you today that, a number of you already know this, that in the end of period 9, and bear in mind there are 12 periods in a year, then the deficit, or the projected deficit at the end of this year, was 1.4 million negative, almost in the rounding errors. Along this route, not so many months ago, a serious vote of confidence was received by this council from the government when they allowed us to use up to £70 million of capital receipts, which bear in mind has previously been pulled, to do 4 things. One was to eliminate the 2017-18 unfunded deficit, so that's been done. Place up to £20 million back in our reserves. Eliminate any deficit that may or may not arise in this financial year. That won't be necessary. And to utilise capital funds for any genuine transformational programme. So, and for the government to do that, that's a very clear indicator in my book that they think we've got some idea what we're doing. We know what we're doing. So NCC now stands with a year-end outlook of minus 1.4 million, and the expectation is that we would improve that situation over the next 3 months. We'll see. But there's no promises here, but I would expect that to be the case. How do we do that? Well, it comes back to what I said earlier. It's teamwork, a lot of effort, I can tell you that, in particular from our officers and commissioners. We've got an excellent team there, well, it's shown remarkable results. Significantly, I think it's fair to say, and I'm looking at Danielle over there particularly, because we've spoken about this before, the results achieved by productivity. That's the important point here. Cost control, and again I come back to it, a great deal of effort. There still remains a lot of unknowns, but not a lot, a couple of unknowns that we'll come across, and there's no doubt a few storms ahead, even in the next 3 months. But I can tell you this now, that we're in a much, much better place to deal with them as and when they come, which they inevitably will. Nature of the business. There have been a number of one-off interventions during the year, and that will have to be, that will be looked at as well, because one-off intervention doesn't run through. But equally, there's been some half-year positives, which haven't flowed the full year this year, but in fact will next year. So that's a good. So there's a pluses and minuses there. I was initially disappointed that in the stabilisation plan we had a fairly substantial figure that we were hoping to get the support of the districts and boroughs to, and that would have been another £8 million, and we'd have been in positive territory by now. But in fact, on reflection, I'm actually quite pleased it went the way it did, because what it did, it forced us to go back and re-look again. And the CEO here set up a meeting on January the 7th, I think was the date, where she actually recovered that money and a little bit more as well, which has put us in the position we are now. And that's again down to our CEO and the officers that support her. So it all turned out rather well. Didn't quite look at it at the time, it is now. Right, so I'm going to go on now to the 1920 overview. And I'll start by saying that the budget is predicated on a zero deficit in this current financial year. Now, whether we'll quite get there or we're not quite sure, but it's predicated. So there'll be no usage of reserves or anything of that nature. So it's assuming we hit zero or thereabouts. The annual expenditure for schools, is, excluding schools, is £617 million. That's what we're going to be spending. Huge amount of money. But the net budget is 441. Now, for those that don't quite follow that, there's income comes in as well. So you get the initial budget, take off any income, and 441 is where you end up. But my view is you look at two figures. You look at the 617, the spending, and you look at the income, the two quite separate arguments. Net figure is 441. A couple of points in the budget. The first of all is the fire service has been transferred, so that's now longer in this budget. And the school's revenue budget is a wash. What I mean by that is what comes in goes out. So I'm not referring to it here because it's one in, one out. But anybody that wants the detail of that, they're very welcome to have it. And what's significant about it is there's a change of balance in it, in that the high needs allocation has risen, and taken a bigger percentage of the budget than previously. So anybody that's interested in that area, it's worthy of note. Right, now this goes against normal, my normal feelings, I think, but the council tax increase is going to be 2.99, and we've been allowed via government to add 2% to that. So the council tax increase will be 4.99. We're still one of the lowest in the country. Having said that, it grieves me to put council tax up at all, really. But anyway, we've got to be realistic about it, and it's 4.99. The use of capital receipts will continue where transformation projects where appropriate. And I'm going to come back to transformation projects as I go through, because it's going to be the key to next year and following years. It's based on productivity, programs and cost control again. Same approach. The thanks again go back to the scrutiny committees. Now you all know who you are, so too many to mention. That's been very good, gone very well this year. I think they've enjoyed it, I think it's fair to say. So thanks to the scrutiny committee, that's worked well. Commissioners, of course, officers, staff at many levels. Everyone's had their input, thanks to them. There's been considerable consultation outside of the NCC. And where's our scoutmaster gone? He's around, so he's gone, is he? Oh, there he is. Yeah, and a very good example of it. I mean, it wasn't a huge amount of money, but nonetheless, it was consulted on. We had our feedbacks, and we changed. And that's just one example. There's quite a few I'm going to come to later. But also, it's a great credit to the staff because there was less time than normal. Because of the situation, this budget has been in a shorter timescale than would normally be the case. Normally, we'd be even thinking about next year's and the year after budget now, and I think that's actually been done. So, the issues. I just want to make quite clear that this isn't an easy task and is not a walk in the park. It may appear it superficially, but it's not. It has to be achieved. It's not easy. We believe it will be achieved, but it's not a walk in the park. We're not prone to optimism, as you're probably gathering from this. And events do occur. They're bound to occur. They'll occur as the year goes on. And we'll deal with them. But as I said earlier, we're in a much better place to be able to do so than we certainly were before. Always uncertainty. Unitary. Where's that going? I don't know. Brexit. Certainly don't know about that. So what we have here is the best judgment at a point in time. And it may well change. Always the risk of unforeseen demand, we all know that, heard that before. And we must seriously have the need to identify qualifying transformation expenditure and delivery of capital receipts to fund that programme. This is going to be absolutely key. And I'll come to the capital point in a moment. The positives are the county has been awarded the business rates pilot scheme. Now that's worth 17 million. 17 million, big number, across the county. And that's another clear vote of confidence. Now, I can tell you now that the 17 million will be distributed across the county. We don't know what our share will be yet. So therefore, we have not included it in this year's budget. So that'll be a bonus as and when it happens. Nice one to have. Now, of the 41 million savings requirement that in this coming budget, I can tell you now that a significant amount of the necessary savings are already being made. In that, we'll get a full year effect, as I described earlier. Okay, are we happy with that? Now, I'm going to dwell on this point a little bit. There is a general contingency figure of 2.11 million, referred to by a couple of people up the top there. I will tell you this now, that the CEO and the leader made a statement in their address recently, and I'm going to confirm this, is that that money is a general contingency. Now, as and when we believe that we have sufficient headroom and we are confident that we will deliver this budget, then that will go as directed from the CEO and the leader, into a wage payment. If we are not confident, it will not while I'm in this seat. We'll get these numbers right first, and I believe that we will be able to do that, but we've yet to do it. We've got to, as I said, this budget's got to be achieved. It's not a giveaway. So when we've got that, we'll do it. We're not going to go to the return to the ways of hope and hope it'll be all right. We've got to make sure it is all right. We'll only do what we know is possible. And when it is possible, we will do it. The other two positives I would refer you to is the 151 officer's statement in the report. Words of wisdom there from Ian. And also, of course, the letter with the Commissioner's endorsement. So we've got the endorsement of the 151, we've got the endorsement of the Commissioners. We're looking pretty good for this year, the way it's going. Looking okay. So by department, if you look to adults, the allocated annual expenditure there, an enormous number of 239.4 million. But the net budget is at 159.7. Now this is the area where the first transformation board is. And I've just picked one or two items here. One of the items is going to be maximising the assets to reduce the dependency on suppliers. So we're going to be doing more in-house there. Cut the costs, more control, should work out better, we hope. Installing new extra care schemes. This is just one. There's numerous projects, but those are just two examples. There's always concerns go with adults, as we all know. It's very hard to predict. And one of them is, of course, what will the winter bring? Well, so far, so good this year. So we're actually doing okay on that side of it. What's going to happen next winter? Anybody guess? I don't know. Anyway, so and of course, we've always got to control cost inflation. So that's the adult situation. Children's, got a new head there in Sally, sat over there, listening intently, no doubt. And the allocated annual expenditure there is 139.6 million, with a net budget of 116.8. And there we have and then again, this is the second transformation board, second area. So they're big numbers here. We're talking nearly 400 million between the pair of them. And there will be a drive on to repatriate children in care into a local setting. Clearly, they cost more money when they're out of county. And that's a drive on that. There's another drive to increase NCC occupancy rates, in-house provision, things like that. And of course, the old chestnut, we've got to continue to reduce agency staff. Now, you're all going to say, oh, I heard that before, but yeah, we're going to do that. Place is the third area, third transformation board. And in that case, we've got some positives here in that the winter gritting programme, again, this is part of consultation, has been returned to previous levels. So that's a good one. We've already had free use of schools by uniformed and community groups. He's not an off up there, is he now? No, he's not. Minor road maintenance improved and reduced waste forecasts. All these things have come about. The total expenditure in place is 128.2 million with a net budget of 90.3. And the concern in that area again is what will the winter bring? I don't know, but we've got to deal with it when it happens. Central and Treasury, the allocation there is 33.2 with a net budget of 32.6. And this is the fourth transformation board. And we're looking for general ongoing efficiency, treasury management, critical to us, and of course the insurance reserve replenishment. The uncertainties there are really all associated with the financial position. Where will interest rate go? What's Brexit going to do? And so on. You know, we all know what they are, but we've got to deal with them. LGSS, fairly small budget there. Allocation of 19.5 with a net of 14.6. There's no transformation board here. It's not really within our control in that area, but we will be looking to reduce waste and drive more efficiency there. There'll be a story coming out there, no doubt, next year. Wellbeing, the allocated annual expenditure 45.1, but the net budget being 4.1. Now, there's a bit of a lesson here to be learned. There is no transformation board. There's a number of programs there, and the important thing here, there's no particular concerns, in my view, in that area, providing we obey the rules. Now, anybody that was around it a couple of years ago will know what I mean by that. Okay. Right, turning to the capital programme. The capital programme is 373 million and over 3 years. But of course, the later years will be subject to the any reorganisation. I mean, we put it in because that's what we always do, and what happens in the years to come remains to be seen. There are 58 key schemes, and of those 58, they're scheduled to cost 303, and are productivity focused again. Discretionary schemes will be 24.5, and the key thing about capital here, I'll dwell on this, because it's very easy to say, okay, here's an amount of money, we'll capitalise it, and that improves the revenue position. But any capital decisions do have an impact on the revenue budget, inevitably. The best, I don't want to patronise that in any way, but it's a bit like getting to Thursday night and you've spent all your wages, you take an overdraft. Solves the immediate problem, but you clearly got a problem downstream. You know, it's not a good way of doing it. So, and I think this is one of the very first things I think our CEO got involved in. And it's, so when we talk about capital, it will either come from cash or from revenue, if we have it. It might come from capital receipts. That's fine, so that doesn't increase the borrowing. Or it will be a genuine payback situation, in which case it pays its way. And the basic understanding that any input into the capital budget has a direct impact on the revenue line will be the underlying approach there. Right, just to summarise then, I'd like to think that we've always been open and transparent. We've always invited, certainly in my tenure, the Labour and the Liberal group to get involved as much as they wanted to be involved. And this is an NCC budget we're putting in, and as such, we're always open to any good ideas, good, positive ideas. And no good griping, we want ideas. You know, got a better idea, let's have it. We've listened to scrutiny, thank them again for their inputs. Listened to the outside views, schools, etc., organisations, incorporated their requirements where it's appropriate. Couldn't always do it, but by and large we have. However, I'd like to point out that really this year's year-end and next year's budget is really work in progress. It's on a path, and it's getting it into a sustainable long-term situation. We've sort of regularised it, we think, pretty close to, but it's a long-term thing. Ideally, do it another couple of years on there would get it really, really good. And we believe that this budget lays the groundwork for the foundation for the local government reorganisation. Had a great deal of help and support, commissioners in particular, and we thank them for that. They brought in some really good talent, which has been very helpful to us. And I'll go back to, we've had 4 effectively votes of confidence from the government, votes of confidence. The ability to use our capital receipts to remove the 2017 deficit, the ability to use our capital receipts to restore our reserves, the ability to be involved in the business rates programme, and of course the ability to increase our council tax demand by an additional 2%. These are very powerful messages, very powerful indeed. They wouldn't have done that before, I don't think. The commissioners, staff and members, again I'll repeat what I started with, are dedicated, and I think that's a fair word, to pass on the very best financial position we are capable of delivering. That's what we're going to do. And I'll finish on the NCC has sufficient resources to deliver this programme, and the NCC can and will, as far as we're here, live within its means. Chairman, I'd like to propose that this budget be submitted to the Chamber for adoption for the next financial year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Longley, and I call upon Councillor Garvey to second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to second the budget, and I'll reserve my right to speak at the end, if okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got to invite now Councillor Scrimshaw to make a statement. You have 20 minutes, sir.
Chairman, councillors, members of the public, this council has been on an interesting journey over the last few years, and its financial position has been well documented, so much in fact that the whole local authority sector and the country as a whole is watching us with interest to see what happens next. 1920, therefore, is a key year for this council, and as there is a need, once and for all to sort out the council's finances as we move towards unitary councils, it's therefore vital that we have confidence in today's budget that it will enable us to do that. So the question for us today is whether this budget and the proposals within it will actually help solve the financial problem NCC has. Will it improve the financial position, or will it fall short and leave further legacy problems to be picked up by the proposed unitaries? In short, will this budget deliver on its promises, and will it enable the council to balance its books in 1920 and to balance them in a sustainable way, without relying on further one-off measures and more short-term solutions that won't be able to be repeated the year after? This time next year, when the new shadow unitaries are setting their budgets, will NCC have kept its promise and its duty to residents, or will there still be financial problems to be passed on to those unitaries because this budget has failed? That's a difficult question, and it's not one that we can actually answer at the moment. We know that the method of preparing this budget has been improved from previous years, although presumably that is because of the involvement of the government's commissioners and new senior management rather than anything else. And there are some good things in this budget, and the Labour Group certainly welcome the move away from the now discredited Next Generation project, which has been a blight on this council for so long, and for more services to be either brought directly in-house or at least under the direct accountability of this council and not sitting outside in some sort of third-party organisation, publicly owned or otherwise. However, while there are clear plans about council-owned children homes and dementia facilities, for example, although there are some very real questions about the timescales involved with those, so much of how this will work is still undecided. There isn't detail or a clear vision as to this way forward. There is therefore a clear risk whether this budget will actually do what it attempts to do in the timescales that it sets itself to do it. We also, however, welcome the move to reduce silo working and to find ways to engage with the community and with the proposals to work closer with our partners, with health, with the districts and boroughs, although we all know that this brings risk in itself, and past experiences, including recent relations with the districts and boroughs, shows us that this is unlikely to be plain sailing. We appreciate that this budget tries to articulate the Council's plans to transform services rather than rely on service reduction, although clearly there are a lot of services that will also be affected. But those transformation plans pose another risk in that changing services quickly enough to deliver the hoped savings is doubtful. We all know, I think, the complexity of doing this, and there has to be some very real question marks about whether an organisation the size of NCC can do this in time, and that in itself leads to the financial risk of whether this budget will in fact balance next year, and therefore has potentially serious implications for the future unitary councils. There are many of us that simply don't think the proposed timescales for unitary reform are long enough, and if anything, I think this budget just highlights that. All of these questions have to point to a question about the overall robustness of the budget. And a Cabinet member made the point last week about the lack of reserves and the pressure that this will give us. They were referring, of course, to there being no place to go if this budget does not deliver and there is slippage. And that, again, is a real concern, given some of my previous comments. At that same Cabinet meeting, Scrutiny reported their concerns that in the budget there was still a lot of work in progress, which is a fair assessment and something said again and again by both Cabinet members and officers during the budget scrutiny process. This stopped Scrutiny from giving an overall assurance on the deliverability of the budget as a whole. And unfortunately, this is still the case today, with many of the details surrounding individual saving proposals or budget lines still not finalised, and some of the details of those proposals not expected for some time. The Section 151 officer alluded to this during the last Cabinet meeting when he referred to the pressures to individual budget lines. There are still so many unknowns, and so there are difficulties within these plans. And one of them surely has to be about forecasting demand. Year after year, this council has underestimated demand and the cost that goes with it. And year after year, during the budget setting process, we've been assured that this year they have it right, only for us to again and again see that this actually wasn't the case. Given these past experiences, it isn't unreasonable to consider this also as a risk, one which is highlighted by the commissioners themselves. And while we appreciate demand cannot always be accurately forecast, and when new demands arise, they do have to be met, and we totally agree that they have to be, it does again raise legitimate financial questions. Extra demand means extra cost, and a small contingency fund could well not be enough to meet these costs. So again, we're left with the unenviable conclusion that should these costs rise, we have no way of paying them. I don't envy the Cabinet's position on this. It is difficult. But the question for us today is, will this budget be able to deliver in those circumstances? And we simply don't have an answer to that. We cannot know. And we therefore have no option to once again regard this as a risk to the budget. Maybe it's an acceptable risk. I do understand the nature of budgets for demand-led services carry risk, but where possible, those risks need to be mitigated. But I'm afraid I do not think we are starting to see, I think we are starting to see a theme with more and more risks being identified. Undoubtedly, one of the problems around this budget is that normally work to put it together would have started far earlier than it was. We were told that by officers and told about the problems that means. There is consequently very little forward planning for year 2 and beyond. So important at the moment as we enter unitary discussions. We were told that the speed it had been put together and the immense pressure on those officers tasked to do it itself brought its own challenges and risk. So even the process in which the budget was rushed through again raised questions about the budget's overall robustness. We note with interest that public health money will be used to invest in prevention services in both children's and adults. However, there are also some very real concerns about other cuts to preventative working that could possibly lead to unintended consequences and future costs, a point specifically made by scrutiny. We also recognise that shifting money from one place to another in that way will only help the long-term financial position of the council if the individual transformation projects actually work. And again, past experiences would have to mean we cannot be certain that this will be the case. Past experiences also raise the worry that doing this will fall outside the rules that Public Health England have around this type of expenditure, although we are to a certain extent reassured by officers' assurances that they've been very careful in the planning and won't make the same mistakes that they have in the past. There are plans to improve the council's procurement process, and it's suggested that this will save £1 million across all departments. But actually that may be rather a modest figure, and given the size of the council and the amount of things that it buys, we hope that actually savings could be far greater than that, but we don't currently know. There's a consultant working on the project at the moment, but we don't know the details of this yet, and although not possibly the most worrying proposal in the budget, it again is an example of uncertainty and not knowing. Since the original draft budget was proposed, we've been told by officers that NCC has traditionally had a culture of falling back far too easily on using expensive agency social workers, and this in part has led to our own staff's careers not being developed at a fast enough pace for them to gain the experience they need. Currently, 50% of our social workers in children's are either newly qualified or part of the new intake of workers from overseas, and so unable to take on these most difficult cases. So straight away there's a pressure around the need once again to revert to using agency workers. And although there are plans in the budget to reduce that, the council needs to save over £40 million. And the biggest area of need, we know, is in children's safeguarding team who do deal with those difficult cases. And this is traditionally, again, one of those areas where rising demand, where we've seen rising demand and under forecasting. Therefore, there have to be some very serious questions about the risk to having once again used more expensive solutions than was originally planned, and clearly weakens the budget in this area. This leads me to talk about staff in general. Staff are the council's greatest asset, and while the leadership again and again publicly acknowledges this and have made a commitment to increase staff pay if it can be afforded, and hopefully this year, why isn't it in the budget? If you're confident about this budget, and generally you say that you are, then show that confidence actually means something by releasing money for the desperately needed staff pay rise. And I'm not talking about the senior management and consultants, sometimes on £100 a day, but the hard-working social workers, admin staff, and others at the bottom of the pay grades who effectively have taken pay cuts for years. We're told time and time again that the situation at NCC is so bad there is only time for a firefighting exercise. But with staff and their morale and subsequent efficiency, that particular house is also on fire at the moment. I would suggest that the reason you haven't put a pay rise in the budget is because you yourselves don't have confidence that your proposals can be achieved. But I would urge you to reconsider this particular issue, as it's simply unfair to push more and more work onto staff without adequate reward. A lot of cash savings proposed in next year's budget are simply from not filling vacancies. After a vacancy has been empty for a while, you're simply saying that there's obviously no need to fill it. So that post can be scrapped and a saving made. But that's not sustainable. More and more work and pressure is being put onto our remaining staff. And by making these vacancies permanent, you are much more likely to have more and more people leave the organisation, leading to even more pressure on the remaining staff. Asking more and more of the council staff brings me on to the fact you are also asking more and more of local residents through the proposed tax increase. Once again, we are seeing a massive above-inflation tax hike for the people of Northamptonshire. This is unfair. Local people are being asked to pay an increase in tax higher than anywhere else in the country, and only because the government have given you special permission to do so. A few weeks ago, we were told by the commissioners, the council leader, and by cabinet members that money wasn't the issue. We were told there was already enough money in the council, we just needed to spend it differently. If that's true, then why on earth do we need such a big rise? I'll tell you why. It wasn't true. And the reason it wasn't true is that in the past, instead of putting small, measured increases in council tax, perhaps around the rate of inflation, this council chose not to do so. It chose instead to take an ideological position of low taxation and small government. But that isn't the whole reason. It's also because of a further ideological drive towards the idea that all of our services could magically be provided by other people outside the direct control of the council. It was never explained how this would work, and the reason it wasn't explained we know from the Calla report. There was never a workable plan. Instead, this council spent something like £60 million of public money trying to make a round peg fit in a square hole. And the legacy cost of that wasted money is now being passed on to local taxpayers. The £6 million extra that government have allowed you to raise with the extra 2% is just 10% of the money wasted on the Next Generation project. We're required by law to set a budget. And we will undoubtedly do that today. But is this budget actually the one that we need to set? There are so many unanswered questions surrounding it, and it's impossible to offer a final judgment as to what it will actually mean for the council in the next 12 months. There's so much work still to do, work that is not identified by the budget. We genuinely have no idea if this budget will succeed in delivering this council from the financial problems it still faces. The Section 25 report and the commissioners themselves highlight the magnitude of savings to be found, the risk around unforeseen demand, the identification of qualifying transformation expenditure, and again, that's something the Council doesn't have a particularly good track record in, uncertainty over grant funding, the risk about finding enough property and assets to sell, and the cost and complexities of local government reform. The whole budget almost seems to rely on the hope that NCC will receive a one-off chunk of money from the business rates pilot. But not only do we not know how much that will be, it will just be a one-off. By its nature, it's unsustainable. And even if it's needed to prop up the revenue budget next year, it won't stabilise our financial position moving forward. What the people of Northamptonshire need is actually quite simple. They need their services protected. They need social care to look after them when necessary. They need their potholes filled and vulnerable children to be protected. This budget is more of a financial prayer than a proper plan. It's a vague proposal to get the council out of its financial mess and unfortunately doesn't give residents the guarantees that those basic services will in fact be offered. And please don't reply telling me that the current financial position towards the end of this year has improved, so we can hope for the same again next year, because the continued reliance on one-off unsustainable measures to balance the books does not mean the future is rosy. Far from it. We are simply kicking the problem down the road, and this proposed budget, I'm afraid, does more of the same. As a Labour group, we will only support something that guarantees to deal with the financial position and that has a better than average chance of protecting services. And sometimes that still leaves, this budget still leaves far more questions unanswered than answered. So a budget has to be set today. And I accept that it's too late to come up with a proper set of proposals that will get support from across the whole council. One that will answer those questions of robustness and deliverability. So by setting this fragile and shaky budget today, the council will effectively be simply going through a tick box exercise to meet our legal requirements. And I suspect the work on how this council gets through the next financial year will start again in earnest next week. But I predict that within the first month or two of the new financial year, Cabinet will already be getting reports of budget slippage and unexpected pressures, possibly even sooner than that, depending on how this year's position actually ends up. In those circumstances, we cannot support the budget. It's a Conservative budget, hoping to deal with a Conservative mess brought about by Conservative decisions and Conservative policies. And I'm sorry, but Labour cannot be expected to support a budget when we know there are so many holes in it, when we know that it won't work, and when, as it stands, it doesn't offer any reassurances to the people of Northamptonshire about their services, and nor does it offer the reassurances about the future of Northamptonshire as a whole that our residents need. Thank you.
Right, councillors, you should have found a copy of the budget proposals from the Liberal amendment from the Liberal Democrats group on your seat. So I now invite Councillor Stamborough to propose it. I can't hear you.
Just a point of clarity. Where is the alternative budget for the Labour Party?
There isn't one.
How is this thing?
Look, unless you use your mic, I can't hear you. So.
Can we move on to Councillor?
Right, Councillor Stamborough, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. Chairman, fellow councillors, I gather that some of us present here today have a meeting that they absolutely must attend at 2 p.m. and that it is hoped we will finish by then. But then I also gather that I get 20 minutes for this slot. And you know how I like to talk. However, I'll try to do my bit. I'll save any comments I have on the budget for the 3 minutes I'm told I will get later and cut to the chase. I'm proposing an amendment to the administration's budget proposals that would delete the contingency of 2.113 million in the budget and replace it with a 2% pay increase for staff commencing on the 1st of April 2019. In doing so, I'd like to make something very clear. I'm a champion of ensuring that staff are fairly recognised and rewarded for the work that they do, and that our policies reflect this. I hope that's a statement you all agree with and subscribe to. I know that at least one person in this room does, because they are not my words. They are the words of our Chief Executive in an email to staff this week. And she's right. So, the good news is that I don't need to propose any amendments to years 2, 3 and 4 of the budget, because the effect of a 2% increase in 2019-20 is already factored into the figures in the budget for subsequent years. You might think it's a coincidence that the contingency is exactly equal to the cost of the pay increase, and that it's fortuitous that the knock-on effect of such an increase is already built in to the budget in years 2, 3 and 4. I submit that it's neither. I submit that the pay increase was built into an earlier version of the budget, but at some point somebody made the decision to take it out and create a contingency instead. So, why should we give staff a pay increase on the 1st of April? Because it's the right thing to do. I think everyone agrees on that. If we disagree with each other, and I hope we don't, it's on timing. There are many reasons to do this now. Here's one. At budget scrutiny, Councillor Rumans asked what I thought was an incisive question of one of our directors. He asked, what are the top 2 or 3 reasons that staff give for moving on? The answer was clear, immediate and unequivocal. The number 1 reason, pay. Now, we don't want good, well-qualified, experienced, hard-working staff moving on, do we? We want them to stay and make this council as good as it can be. So why shouldn't we address that number 1 issue? And why shouldn't we address it now? We can do this. The money is there in every year of the 4 years covered by this budget. It's a straight choice, contingency or pay increase. So, do we need a contingency? Well, we didn't need one when the draft budget was proposed in December. We didn't need one when our auditors told us to think again last year and changes were made that met with their approval. We didn't even need one when the Commissioners put forward their stabilisation plan. And frankly, it's a poor show if we have so little confidence in the proposals before us now that we need to build in a contingency today. So, please, 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 do something tangible to show our staff that you support them. To paraphrase our Chief Executive, this change to the budget is reflective of the hard work that our staff have all been part of in identifying and safely delivering savings across services. This is your chance to make a stand, to do what's right, to reward the staff of our council. Let's do it, and let's do it now. Thank you.
Thank you. I ask Councillor Meredith to second. You do it from there, Councillor Meredith.
Thank you, Chair. I'm seconding this amendment because of some of the comments that have been said, and especially the comments that Penny Smith made about assets. Our best assets are our staff. I'd like to talk briefly why I think our staff are our best assets. I come into Angel Street quite often and I look around and I see how hard the staff work. They're sitting there on their computers, nailed to their desks sort of thing, and working very hard to try to bring this council back to as it was. It is the staff that actually will improve this council through their hard work and dedication. And I say to the Conservative controlling group, put your differences aside and vote for this amendment. I also like to take this opportunity of saying to the commissioners, thank you for putting this budget forward and for the hard work that they have done. I take it back that I asked you to go back to London. So I withdraw that statement and I say to you now, welcome. It's through your hard work that this budget has become as it is today. Malcolm Langley suggested...
1 minute.
Longley, it doesn't matter what it is, just... you know what I mean, so don't criticise. Malcolm Longley said, we welcome ideas. Okay, this is a brilliant idea. This will help the staff working to their best capacity. The staff have, like most of us, bills to pay, mortgages to pay, cars to pay. So we should actually propose this amendment and put it forward. I'd like to thank my colleague, Chris Drambo, who I have a lot of respect for, because he actually is worked very hard on this amendment, and he feels, and I, like myself, feel that this is the right way to go.
Can you finish now, please?
Yes. I hope that, I know the Conservatives will be whipped on this, and I think that would be quite sad, because this would be a right step for us to take this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Meredith. I've got 5 indications of speakers that want to speak. If there are any more, you'll have to say to this amendment, that is. That's Councillor Scott, Councillor Hales, Councillor Stone, Councillor Brown, Councillor Clark, and now one more indication here. So I'm going to start with Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we're all aware of the hard work that our staff do and have done for us over many years under very difficult circumstances. We all rely on them to look into things for us, to do things for us, and to steer us in the right direction. Over years, we've relied on them to do more and more as we've cut our staff year on year. And it can't go on. You can't expect that forever. Our staff have done this without having any pay rises for a number of years. That doesn't happen in industry, and they're always being compared with industry. That hasn't happened in industry this year. It didn't happen last year. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, I believe they deserve this rise. They deserve it this year, next year, and the following year. It's within your gift to do that. I think if you don't, you're sending a terrible message back to our staff at a time when you're wanting them to become, as you said, more productive, and you introduced in this budget the phrase productive accountancy, which I think a lot of us were quite wondering what you exactly meant. I've been involved in negotiating productivity deals for 25 years or more. And in local government, in DLOs, we used to have them frequently. And they did reward staff. But your outlook currently is not to do that. I urge you to think again.
Thank you. Councillor Adam Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Stamble is absolutely right. The only issue on which we disagree is that of timing, which is precisely why within the budget we have, as Councillor Longley said, We have built in the contingency, and as soon as we can afford to give a pay rise, then we will give it, and it will be backdated. In future years, there is a pay rise built into budgets, precisely because we value our staff, and we are following the premise that once we can afford something, then we will do it. But it is purely irresponsible to do something before you can afford to do so. Now, I have to wonder whether the Labour group even speak to each other. Councillor Scrimshaw criticised the budget, saying that the contingency fund in place was not enough. Yet now Councillor Scott stands up and says that he wants to spend that contingency fund immediately on a pay rise. But I'm not surprised that they're not speaking to each other and that there is some division within the Labour group, because throughout Councillor Scrimshaw's speech, he was facing both ways on every single issue going. In one breath, he criticised us for over the years not raising council tax. In the next, he criticises us for putting council tax up. He clearly wasn't listening to Councillor Longley when Councillor Longley explicitly said that business rates were not in this budget. Yet he mentioned that the business rates were in the budget.
I'm afraid the point of order is correct. Could you speak about the proposition?
I apologise, Chairman.
Yeah.
So I'll simply go back to say that Councillor Stamborough's spirit within the motion is entirely correct. I think he's approached this in a fantastic manner and with the best interests of this council and of the staff at heart. I'm impressed that within the Liberal Democrat group, 50% of their group have managed to put forward an amendments, whereas the hit rate on the Labour side of the chair is 0. So we disagree on timing alone. I support a pay rise for the staff at the very moment that we can afford to do so.
Thank you. Councillor Hakewell.
Thank you, Chairman. Speaking to the amendment and getting up feeling a lot less lonely in the world of independence this week. It's quite easy for the administration to change their mind. They did a U-turn on the item which was about Scouts, which should never have seen the light of day. What a waste of time and effort for all those good people, but I will collect my badge. They also could have not taken out. Mr. Chairman, you asked that we could be heard. I'll just let you reaffirm that.
Continue.
Thank you. And it is about the amendment, because what we're saying is that we have a fixed view of the administration who have clearly a view on turning round and going backwards on these things. The ignominy of saying to staff, if you behave yourselves or whatever you're saying, there is this budget. There is this budget which could be paying your wages today, tomorrow and over the next year, but we've got it, we're holding it just out of reach from you, seems to me appalling. The finance portfolio holder said that we have to clear some headroom in order to be able to pay this particular amount. I tell you, Mr. Chairman, the best people in the world to help this authority clear some headroom are the staff we are ignoring as far as a pay rise is concerned. In any aspect of business or life, if you look after your people and you pay them the right amount, they will come up with the goods. Many of the other points have already been made in relation to the staff and in relation to this particular item. The last point is, Chairman, you asked for agreement on the minutes of the meeting of November 22nd. One line in that says, and everybody around here was saying so, the council had enough money to provide services provided it chose to spend it well. We all agreed it, without doubt, without question. Since that time on November the 22nd, we've got permission to spend 70 million. We've got the business rates which are sitting there, although I sense the boroughs and districts will get another win on that one and take most of it. And we've also got an extra 2%, the thick end of £90 million additional to the point at which everyone in this council agreed we had enough money. The finances are there, the budget is there, the budget ripples through into future years, and if you turn your back on the staff, we'll be in the same position. Oops, no we won't, we'll be gone in a year's time, and perhaps that's the scenario that we're looking towards. Pay the staff the salaries, it's in the budget, it won't make any difference to what we're talking about today other than to praise and credit our staff.
Thank you. Councillor Hales.
It's a sad day that actually, when we're actually debating an amendment to pay our staff. You say they're going to pay it when we've got the money, but that is tomorrow, tomorrow. They need it today. We have seen with this central government, and I'm not going off the pointers, because the previous 2 years we have actually had extra 3% on our council tax. This year we're putting another 2% extra. So it actually equivalates with compound interest, nearly 9% extra on top of the council tax. And we then expect our staff to go to work day in, day out and not give them a pay rise. And it's actually funny, and I actually welcome it though, that suddenly there's been an atrium address and we can now find the money to pay our staff the sick pay when they got the first few days being sick. They found the money for that. That wasn't within the budget. So why can't we pay our staff the money? And if you're going to backdate it, how far are we going to backdate it? Are we going to be the years that haven't had their pay increase? You know what? Pay them what they're due. Without our staff, we cannot function. And we've seen the problems that we have had. We have got, you know, children in care, you know, reports coming out of our ears where we've done it wrong, and we have to put our hands up and say, we have done it wrong by the children we're supposed to look after. We can't put the blame on the police or anything for health. It's us that have not looked after our children. And to look after our children, we need to have the staff to do their jobs and actually have the training they need to do it, to do the stuff. And even in fees and charges, once again, we're taking something away from our staff. It's when we're actually saying on page 35, under 11.3, dyslexia assessments, we no longer have got one to do this assessment. Oh, but we can train people to do it. And the cost of schools to actually have assessment done is a lot of money. We are not looking after our children, so please pay our staff so they can look after them for us, because we're not doing it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rarely pay Councillor Stamborough any compliments at all, but I will on this occasion. Councillor Stamborough is a consummate actor. A consummate actor knows how to play to the gallery, and that's precisely what Councillor Stamborough is doing. This speech and his proposal, I'm afraid, supported by Councillor Merriweather over there. No, names don't matter, I'm sorry about it. It's quite obvious, Mr. Chairman, that there is an attempt to, as it were, curry favour with certain vested interests. Before we move on, we need to remind ourselves of precisely where we are and the language which has been used about our finances by the commissioners and by the Chief Executive. The most important one is fragile. We hear language in this council chamber used as though we have money coming out of our ears suddenly. We've reached the promised land and we can pay these huge sums of money, as it were, willy-nilly. That is not the position we're in. Northamptonshire County Council, as I see it, is like a patient has just come out of intensive care after a year's real problems. It's come into a situation of what you might call high dependency. It's still in a fragile state. But in breezes Dr. Stamborough, followed by Dr. Merriweather, and what do they say? This patient looks fine. This patient's breathing, his eyes are open. This patient can do the 100 metres. Mr. Chairman, we deceive ourselves if we think that we are in a position to open up the bank account and to pay sums of money which are not properly allowed for in terms of the sums of money we're talking about. We have a £2 million provision in the accounts, a contingency. That is minute. Compared with the sort of figures we should have here, if we were a commercial company, we'd be talking of a contingency in 3 figures. It is minute, and yet we have Councillor Stamborough already saying, let's spend it in advance.
1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, the language that came from Councillor Longley is language we can all support, I think. The words are prudence, the words are carefulness, and the words are using good judgment. We do support our staff, we do support rewarding them appropriately, and everybody on this side has indicated support for that proposal. The key thing is that we wait until we've delivered this year's budget successfully, which we haven't yet done, as Councillor Longley said, and we make sure that the direction of travel that we're in next year is one which is sustainable, and we're then in a position to do what the Chief Exec and the Commissioners have advised, and we all support on this side, is to recognise the performance of our staff. Wait.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Stone.
Thank you. I think this chamber's got a bit of a dilemma If you've got faith in the budget, then you really have to vote for a staff pay increase, don't you? If you don't have faith in the budget, then of course you won't. It seems to me to be a very clear challenge for the people in this chamber. We're talking about a pay increase, but of course if we don't pay the inflationary rate for the job, it means that we are cutting staff wages, which is even worse. And we're doing that at a time when we're putting up council tax, which will impact on individual households in Band D by £94 a year. And the fact of the matter is that if you go onto the shop floor and talk to any of our staff, or you talk to staff who are off sick, you will know that morale at the moment is rock bottom. You will know that our staff are overworked, underpaid, exhausted. And we know that we are entering into the very most difficult year in the history of this county council. We cannot do anything this year without the goodwill and the resilience of our staff. Anything that we do to knock further the goodwill and the resilience is going to be counterproductive for us as an institution, and more importantly, for the communities and the people that we serve. £2.1 million? You're joking, aren't you? That you think we can't afford that? We can't not afford it. And what is really exercising me is the unfairness of what is going on in this county council. So we can afford to pay people £1,000 a day? Nobody is worth that amount of money. We cannot go on doing things like that and create these massive inequalities in our own institution. The staff need to be paid. Please support the amendment.
Thank you. I've got 3 more listed speakers. We're starting to get to the point where we're repeating what other speakers are saying, so I intend to not take any more speakers after these 3 listed speakers. They are Andy Mercer, Councillor McGee and Councillor Golby. So we'll take them in that order. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chairman. It's been said before, but I'll repeat it because some people may not have heard it, but for a council of this size, the contingency in a budget like this should be about 10 million. 2 million is very, very low. I'll also repeat what I said earlier, but which some may not have heard. I'm not aware of any version of any budget that's been proposed in which that money was put forward originally as a pay increase. I don't recognise that at all. At no point did I see that. Now, you may say that I may not have seen everything that was going. Well, maybe, but I certainly didn't see it. We need to stabilise this council. We have got to get it to a point where it is like an ordinary council, where you have an ordinary level of reserves, an ordinary level of contingency, and where you don't have to steer around every pothole. You know you can drive straight over the top of them. At the moment, we are having to, as was said by someone earlier, firefight. There's some superb work being done by the commissioners, the officers, senior officers, and the cabinet to make things get through, but you can't keep going on that sort of system indefinitely. You've got to have some elbow room, some slack, so that you can, if you like, wobble your way through things using what's in reserve and what's the contingency. You can't just rely upon having to do everything perfectly every time. I don't expect that every one of the transformation projects will deliver in the next year or so. They all carry a risk, and you've got to have some slack in the system to cope with the ones that don't deliver. You try your best to make everything deliver, but if you could deliver everything, I would be very, very, very surprised. I've never seen any project that has come in, or set of projects where everything's come in on budget and on time and delivered the savings it's supposed to do. That's why you have a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, and if you're any good, a plan E at the end of that as well, to cope with these situations. For that reason, we have to have that contingency there until we have confirmed that we are delivering enough of the savings next year that we can make sure the budget works. At that point, sure, we've all got a conscience. We would love to see this money paid to staff, and if we can get there without capsizing, we will.
Thank you. Councillor McGee.
Thank you, Chair. I think Michael has been a bit ingenuous to Councillor Stambra there. I often too think the Lib Dems jump on the bandwagon many times, but this time, this is the right thing to do, and it's a good motion. We all know it's a good motion. In fact, I said at Cabinet, so I'll try and keep it short, that I was sitting in a house with a young child and a social worker. It was a manager. And the reason it was the manager was because the person who should be looking after that young person was on the sick with stress. That's the lack of support that we give to our staff. And so if we can support our staff and make sure that we stop them have to go on the sick with stress, we should do that. And one of the ways to do that is not to have nice words about paying them if we can 6 months down the line, but to do it today. And that's within your rights. And achieve it sex smiling. It's not funny. This is people's lives we are talking about. These people's lives we're talking about here. And we have got the right today to change that. To put your hands up and say, yes, okay, let's take that contingency. And I support Councillor Standra's motion and put it forward. And then see the difference it will make to this authority in the next year. You could do that now. So have the guts. Have the guts to stand up to your leadership, stand up to whoever's bringing this forward, whether it be the Chief Exec or the Commissioners. Use our elected members. Use have the final say. So put your hand up and say, yes, we will support this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Galway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to repeat some of the messages that have been said by our group, and very well said that I think they are. We need to remind all members, particularly on the opposition and the movers of this amendment, that we are still operating under a 114 notice. We're still dealing with the situation that is very, very challenging. The wise thing to do, the prudent thing to do, you know, which way do you want it here, is to put a contingency into the budget. That hasn't happened before, and as Councillor Mercer says, we should have a much higher level than we have already. It's prudent to have that contingency in there. The commitment has been made to our staff. We've said all the things around, you know, how much they mean to us and how we need them to come on the journey with us. The commitment was made on Monday with the Chief Executive and myself at the atrium address to say that we're committed to making this pay rise, but we need to do it at the right time, and that's where we stand on it. It's very simple. And also, we made the commitment to reinstate the first day sick pay. That is a declaration of our intent in terms of how we want to support the staff moving forward. But we need to remind everybody here that we're still operating under a 114 notice. We've come a long way, but there's still a long way to go, Chair. We won't be supporting this amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Stambra, to reply. You have 5 minutes, sir, maximum.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thanks to everyone who's spoken today, and thanks to the people in the public gallery who came along and spoke too. It's been an interesting debate, and I will address people that have spoke. If I don't find time to address your comments and you spoke in the debate, it's because I thought that your comments weren't worthy of a response. Dennis, thanks for your support. Much appreciated, as always. And it's good to know that, in actual fact, it's 100% of the Liberal Democrat group, Councillor Brown, who have put forward this amendment, because, of course, the other member seconded it. Councillor Bob Scott, I agree. Staff deserve a pay rise, and it will aid productivity. It absolutely will. Councillor Brown, Adam Brown, that is. What can I say? I did not expect to be love-bombed, I have to say. When I saw your name on this list, I thought, oh dear. But what was good to hear was that even if this isn't agreed today, you absolutely committed this council, I believe, to a pay rise that will be given and backdated. And that's something, I suppose. It's something. So thank you very much for that. Councillor Hales, I agree. Nevertheless, Councillor Brown, jam today is good, but jam tomorrow is no jam. Councillor Stone, I also agree. The councillors in this chamber should have confidence, and they should vote for this amendment. I think that's fine. Councillor Mercer, take your point about contingencies, not heard you make it before, and also your explanation as to not being aware of earlier versions of the budget. I think all I can say on that is it shows that you're out of the loop. And Councillor McGee, thank you for the, in quotes, backhanded compliment. But I agree with you. Let's do it today. And finally, Councillor Golby, I'm glad that you have told staff how much they mean to us. They mean everything to us, but let's show it. Let's show it. So finally, councillors, I ask you to support the amendment that myself and Councillor Meredith have put forward. If you feel you cannot support it, then abstain, and let's see if it gets the support of those who vote in favour. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last person to speak is Councillor Longley. If he wishes to, you can speak as well, sir. Up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I think I said everything I had to say when I stood up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. That cuts it down nicely. Right, we'll now invite councillors to take a recorded vote.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Auger. Against. Councillor Fiona Baker. Against. Councillor Jane Birch. For. Councillor Elizabeth Bowen.
Against.
Against. Councillor Wendy Brackenbury. Against. Councillor Rebecca Breeze is absent. Councillor Julie Brookfield. For. Councillor Adam Brown. Against. Councillor Robin Brown. Against. Councillor Pinder Chowan. Against. Councillor Michael Clark. Against. Councillor Julie Davenport. For. Councillor Gareth Eales. For. Councillor Scott Edwards. Against. Councillor Jonathan Eakins. Against. Councillor Matt Golby. Against. Councillor Andre Gonzalez de Savage. Against. Councillor Rob Goff. Against. Councillor Martin Griffiths. Against. Councillor Jim Hakewill. For. Councillor Eileen Hales. For. Councillor Mike Hallam. Against. Councillor Amy Howard. Absent. Councillor Dudley Hughes. Abstain. Councillor Sylvia Hughes. Against. Councillor Cecile Irving Swift. Against. Councillor Andrew Kilbride. Against. Councillor Graham Lawman. Against. Councillor Stephen Legg. Against. Councillor Malcolm Longley. Against. Councillor Arthur McCutcheon is absent. Councillor John McGee. For. Councillor Alan Matthews. Against. Councillor Andy Mercer. Against. Councillor Jill Mercer. Against. Councillor Dennis Meredith. For. Councillor Ian Morris. Against. Councillor Sandra Naden Hawley. Against. Councillor Steve Osborne.
Against.
Against. Councillor Bill Parker. Against. Councillor Suresh Patel. Against. Councillor Victoria Perry. Against. Councillor Angela Roy. For. Councillor Sam Rumans. Against. Councillor Adil Sadigov is absent. Councillor Bob Scott. For. Councillor Mick Scrimshaw. For. Councillor Judy Shepherd. Against. Councillor Chris Smith-Haynes. Against. Councillor Jason Smithers. Against. Councillor Chris Stamborough. For. Councillor Danielle Stone. For. Councillor Winston Strachan. For. Councillor Michael Tye. Against. Councillor Anna Walker. And Councillor Malcolm Waters. Against. Thank you.
As soon as this is announced.
Yeah, okay. That was lost. 14 for the proposal, 37 against, 1 abstention and 4 absent. We move on now to the substantive motion. Now, I've got one heck of a list of just about every councillor in the room.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a rather urgent meeting to attend, as was referred to earlier. Is it possible to speak early in the list on the substantive motion?
As you've indicated that, I'm sure we can do it. Yes. I've got you down there, Councillor Griffiths, so we will do that. So, like I say, I've got a rather long list of just about everybody. If, when I come to your name, you don't wish to speak, please indicate. Oh, you wish to be added on the list, right. And also, Councillor Hakequell. You're on the list, Councillor Hakequell, already. Yes, you're not on the list. And who was the other one?
Another one over here.
Ah, Councillor Dudley Hughes. Right. We'll start with Councillor Adam Brown.
Thank you again, Chairman, and hopefully this time I can stay on message. Mr. Chairman, the budget for us today is the first of Northamptonshire's new era. It's the first after the earthquake caused by the Calla report and 2 Section 114 notices shook this institution to its very core. It is the first of a new Conservative cabinet, and it is the first to go through a budget scrutiny process chaired by our opposition. It is a budget that, whilst still burdened by past errors, seeks to look to a brighter future where we do the boring well and start regaining the confidence of the public. It may be my second budget as a county councillor, but it is the first that I will vote for with the confidence that whilst many challenges lie ahead, it is entirely within our abilities to deliver on. This budget provides £1.2 million more for children's services, £673,000 more towards independent adult social care placements. It reinstates £475,000 of highways maintenance, and it protects the funding for community use of schools, such as for the groups like the Brownies in Pattershall within my division, who I visited a few weeks ago, and who can continue now their amazing work with brilliant young people across our county. The approach taken by this Conservative administration under Councillor Goldby's charge is that as council finances improve, so will the services that people receive. With this budget, that message is writ large. We will deliver more funding for the services that protect the most vulnerable and a reversal of cuts we never wanted to make. But we know that there is an awful lot more still to do. We do not pretend that with this budget or with recent measures that everything is yet as it should be. We know that for many people, whether they be nursery owners or everyday motorists, there is a long way to go before we can even begin to think that the job is done. Today is simply another step in the right direction. And it must be the right direction because the budget is being debated today with no amendment put forward by the main opposition party, and only one amendment put forward from the minor opposition group, an amendment that in due time we on this side of the chamber would readily lend our support to. So for all the talk of past mistakes, for all the complaints about what else should be done, 11 elected opposition councillors cannot think of a single tangible alternative to put forward. They may in the end vote against this budget, but when they have led the scrutiny process and when they have put forward no amendment whatsoever, it is clear that any complaint they present here today is nothing more than narrow party political posturing. It is flutter and rhetoric poured forth simply the expectation that by clinging to the tales of crisis, when the music stops, they will simply walk into power. That's not the behaviour of administration in waiting. That's a party following our and it makes clear that the answers to the questions in front of us are only answered by the Conservative administration.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't play to the gallery. I'll just make a speech. The hands of the Commissioners and Chief Executive are clearly seen in this budget. The direction has changed and for the better. It's great to see Labour ideas at last being taken on board. However, this is a high-risk budget. Many of the proposals to save money increase the spend in later years and rely on the 2 unitaries to find the money. We're still awaiting the audit sign-off, for 17-18, the value of one Angel Square is being questioned. The effects of Brexit could mean increased prices, interest rates and other consequences. The split of the 17.1 million between NCC and district boroughs is yet to be settled. They usually like 80%. Whilst the savings in 2018-19 look impressive, it was achieved by government allowing us to use our own money to pay for the shortfall for 17-18, and by many one-off savings that will not continue in subsequent years. As a council, we should be concentrating on the people we serve. Of course, we should be carrying out our statutory duties, but we should also be investing more in preventative services. We know that things like social isolation is on the increase. We know children's dental health is getting worse, that children are getting overweight earlier, that self-harming is on the increase. And we also know that early prevention saves millions of pounds in later years. More needs to be spent on early years services. Sure Start schemes that work to ensure that under 5s get a proper start in life are well known for their record of success. Yet in this county, we've cut their funding and closed centres year on year. The early years sector are feeling very challenged by the financial challenges they face, lack of information and communication from this council. In my division, we have a nursery that won the Times Educational Supplement Award for the best early years and overall school of the year, selected from a range of secondary, primary and nursery schools throughout the country. A fantastic achievement. And how do we reward them? We cut their funding. Out of the proposed 300k clawback from 9 nurseries, we're going to take 98k from Pengreen. And on top of this, we're also cutting 50 pence per hour per pupil in 2019-20, with the removal of the quality supplement. Quality is what we want, isn't it? There are also rumours of cutting high needs funding, which doesn't cover living
30
wage currently.
seconds.
And to cap it all, there's been no mention of their funding for 2019-20 as yet. We know that a good education and early intervention in the early years is the key route out of poverty, and that difference in cognitive performance between disadvantaged children and their peers is noticeable by the age of 3. We should be urgently addressing these issues and embedding these services in our communities so they can reach vulnerable families and children as quickly as possible.
Can you finish,
this
please?
This budget goes no way to delivering that. There's too much work in progress for this in this budget, and therefore we oppose it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Stamborough.
Thank you, Chair. Just touching on budget scrutiny first, one of the things that has happened as a result of the Centre for Public Scrutiny's recommendations was that there were some changes to scrutiny, and they, in the main, I think, have worked quite well. One of the things the Centre for Public Scrutiny did recommend, however, was that scrutiny should have sight of emerging savings proposals at its not public pre-scrutiny meeting. Now, that hasn't happened. That's made scrutiny difficult. We need to take that recommendation seriously if we're going to improve scrutiny further. So, taking my lead from Councillor Brown's speech, there are some high-profile failures in last year's budget. I'll mention just 2. The gritting cuts, thankfully revisited after an ultimatum to the leader from the Conservative Awkward Squad. And cuts to libraries, leading to a judicial review. This council lost at a cost of £200,000, a cost which shamefully was then mitigated by in-year savings within the library service. In the current year, we're now showing a much improved position compared to June last year. Well done. No, not so pleased. But why the improved position? We've been allowed by the government to use our money to get us out of last year's financial hole. And we've been allowed by the government to pay an extra 2% of our money next year in council tax to get us out of the current hole. Your hole created by you, the Conservative group, led by Councillor Golby. There's clearly a different approach this year, but it's not because there's a different group in charge with a different leader. It's still the Conservatives in charge, still led by Councillor Golby. The difference has been made by others, as acknowledged by Councillor Longley.
1 minute.
I didn't expect you to vote for our amendment. I hoped you might, but it was a forlorn hope. All the warm words and hand-wringing are for nothing. Nobody believes you. They judge you by your deeds, not your words. We've even been told that some of the measures in this budget are work in progress and some may not even work at all. That's a familiar refrain, isn't it? Well, time has come for that refrain to stop. I think we know this. So, I wish everyone charged with delivering this budget the best of luck. They will need it, and they cannot and must not fail, because if this Conservative budget does fail, then you will have set up the new unitary authorities to fail too. We shan't be supporting the budget. You didn't accept our amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Higwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just tempted to say that Councillor Adam Brown's speech says everything about why I feel more comfortable this year than last year. It's such a great shame, isn't it, that you at the beginning of the meeting, Mr. Chairman, said no barracking or clapping or wild applause. What was interesting was, and it was a good contribution by the Scout leader, but the other two speakers were not given any sort of applause because they didn't fit the mould of the Conservative group. And one understands that, but the lack of respect for those who might have a view is palpable in this particular chamber. And it's the old days. There's a lot of dinosaurs about, and we look out beyond. I hope that might happen when I said dinosaurs, because obviously empty dinosaurs make most noise. So in this budget, last year, trading standards was massively indicated as having a great cut, and they were impassioned pleas by people who were then not in the administration, then are. I don't see any resumption of trading standards, any budget going into there. I have to say again, Mr. Chairman, we all agreed at the beginning of this meeting that this council had enough money for services, provided it chose to spend it well. So if there isn't enough money for the last item, and I won't vote for this budget because I think the staff increase should go, if there isn't enough money, it's clearly not being spent well. You can't have it both ways. It's clearly not being spent well. The county, as Councillor Stanborough has said, has got more money than any other county or borough or district in the whole country by that one additional percentage. That was given 2 months after we were told we had enough money. So actually, something is just as absolutely as wrong as it was in the past in relation to this budget. People will be suffering continued austerity. Our staff will continue to wonder how valued that they are. And the last point I will make, Chairman, is I find it appalling that when some member of the public comes to this council to want to speak for 3 minutes, uses a word like zealot, look it up in the dictionary. It means someone who's fanatical about pursuing their political interests or other interests. Well, that's what I see as fanaticism. I don't see that's wrong. But I think, Mr. Chairman, it's your job to manage the meeting, not for someone who wants to come nervously, speak for 3 minutes, to be interrupted by the leader who's not here now to do that. That's your job. So I won't be voting for this budget, most strongly because of the failure of the last amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. And for information purposes, Councillor Hakewell, I was about to interrupt when the leader stood up, and I was about to say the same thing. And I can't resist saying that dinosaurs were animals that used to roam singularly away. And one could say that a dinosaur has gone from that side to that side.
As a point of order, Mr. Chairman, there are lots of us.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't get involved, but I thought it was funny. Councillor Clark.
Mr. Chairman, continuing this theme of praising Councillor Stanborough, he just used the words "judge us by our actions and not our words." 3 words just to remind you, Councillor Stanborough, of some things that should come back to haunt you. Student tuition fees. Couldn't resist that. People who live in glass houses, Councillor Stanborough. Mr. Chairman, there are a few words which spring to mind when looking at the budget in the round. They are workmanlike, they are thorough, they are cautious, and cautiously optimistic. I think we can move forward with a piece of work which has been well researched, which has been gone into by the new team of officers, today with the Cabinet, and has been analysed ad infinitum to make sure that it holds water. More to the point, the function this year of the Scrutiny Committee has been a vast improvement, as one who survived the last 3 budget scrutinies, over the last experiences. We've had, and I must pay him another compliment, good chairmanship from Councillor Stanborough, Councillor Scrimshaw and Councillor Eakins. As someone who sat on some of those committees and asked questions, I felt that we were liberated. We weren't sort of hounded or persecuted for asking supplementary questions. It was about the members of those committees, and we were allowed to probe officers and get answers from officers. There were no no-go areas, as had previously been the case on previous scrutinies. So it was, as a result, a much more relaxed scrutiny. There was a light touch by the 3 gentlemen concerned, and the result was as we have before you today. It was a result which I think commends itself to this Council. It aided the process of correcting things that were wrong in the budget, and we've heard them from the Scouts and the various other groups. The Cabinet has clearly learnt, and the atmosphere in which scrutiny and Cabinet interacted was one which I think is a model for future meetings of that sort. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rumans.
We've obviously been on quite a journey the last year, and I do actually get that there have been some sort of one-off measures that most of us on this side would do to actually balance the budget. So we've dealt with the previous years. We've closed off 17-18 pretty much, and 18-19 obviously we're now nearly there with the 1.4 million situation. I go into this situation this year looking at last year and where we were that day on the 28th of February. And what had been presented in front of us was something that I couldn't see any coherence in. I couldn't see any reasonable reason why I had confidence. Councillor Scrimshaw alluded earlier to the fact that the Labour group wouldn't vote for anything that they couldn't have absolute confidence in. Now, I can't have absolute confidence in this budget this year, and I don't think anyone in any organisation, business, whatever, could have absolute confidence in any budget that's ever been set in history. But what we can do is look at where we're at today, look upon the basis at which this has been formed, which is on fact. It's on getting to the bottom of the real issues that we had in this organisation, which was a distinct lack of information coming forward from parts of the council to backbench members, to opposition members and all the rest of it. We didn't have an ability to scrutinise. Now we do. Now we are able to ask the real questions, to challenge officers, as we have done in budget scrutiny this year. Challenge the Cabinet. I'm sure the Cabinet members will know that we have grilled them like a piece of meat on a grill in the last few months over decisions that they made, and believe me, we have. So I am slightly confused by the position over at the Labour group. So Councillor Stone, who I do love dearly, you vote against the amendment. By that, you would not have confidence in the budget. Now, I don't agree with the statement in that, but by her own admission, that surely means that if she voted and other members voted for the that they do have confidence in the budget. So I welcome the potential support from our lovely Labour colleagues, and I know Mr Eales is ready to have a nice grilling back on, which is fine. But yes, I think we should get behind Mr Councillor Longley and the rest of the team, and we should push this through, because finally we're getting to a point where the figures we look at actually make some sense and actually bear some relation to the organisation that we are taking a part in.
Thank you. Councillor Auger.
I didn't even know I put my name down to speak.
I have a list that looks like that as well.
I'll be very quick. I'll be very, very quick. Listen, we've listened to the debate, and I appreciated the comments about scrutiny. We worked with our Labour and our Liberal colleagues in giving our best to get underneath this budget, to try to, ask difficult questions, and I make no apologies for that. And they are our blue cabinet colleagues. But it was important that we asked difficult questions. It's important we got under the skin. And the report that we put forward, you know, it wasn't a glowing appraisal of the budget. It was a realistic appraisal, and there was some good and there was some bad. So I think overall we have had a really good stab at trying to get budgets right. And as my colleague Councillor Rubin said, it's very difficult, all right, to actually set a budget that actually delivers. You can only do your best based on the circumstances you had, based on a little bit of history, and based on what you can possibly predict. So I am confident that we are probably in the best place we can be. I am disappointed that our Labour colleagues won't be supporting this. I do understand why, but I know that they were part of this as well, and they worked with us to try to get a good budget. But I understand about politics. I'm not a great fan of party politics, but I understand that. But I know we'll get this through, and I also know that we're going to give it a really, really good stab. As Councillor Longley said, there are no promises here, but there are a load of talented officers we have now, and I've listened to a few of them during scrutiny, and I've been immensely impressed with them at their candour, at their determination to turn this around. Of course, we got ourselves in this own position, but we're also trying desperately to get ourselves in a fit state to actually form the unitaries and to take public services and public and local government into the future in a far better and fitter state. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Whenever I call your name out, you may be surprised. So if you are surprised, you can decline to speak, because I do have an awful long list. Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you, Chairman. I fully support the budget and the huge progress made in the last 12 months. Yet again, Labour are raising all the problems, have none of the solutions and no alternative proposal. I am amazed that the Speaker referred to the former leader of this council as a scapegoat. The problems of this council have been said many times. They are one of culture. I am appalled that a councillor stood up and loudly supported reference to colleagues on this council being referred to as zealots and worse. This is the very councillors that have spent hundreds of hours in the last 12 months to get us in a better financial position. That same councillor, who is a leading spokesman for equal opportunities and minority religious groups, leaves before prayers in this chamber. That says it all for me. Penny spoke about staff. We must also remember the excellent staff in the districts and boroughs. And I pick up on staff retention is absolutely vital as we move forward into unitary. Malcolm mentioned the role of the government and the concessions that have been made. They were made along with the districts and boroughs and also our MPs after a lot of lobbying and a lot of hard work. My last thing is a plea to every single one of us in this chamber that are elected, and that is to get behind the proposals for unitary councils. Turning 8 into 2 won't be easy. There will be trouble along the way. We have seen it recently. But unitary is being delivered out of need, not desire. We've got a unique opportunity to repair the reputation of this wonderful county of ours, to provide value for money services for all the people we represent, and to protect the most vulnerable people in our society.
1 minute.
I support the proposal, and I think we should all support it, including the opposition.
Thank you. Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not supporting this budget because I've heard at least 3 members of the administration call it fragile. How can we support a fragile budget? If you look at the context in which we're in, across the county, life expectancy is going down on our watch. If you look at what's going on across the county, you will see communities' resilience ebbing by the week. If you look across the county, you will see an increase in food banks, an increase in homelessness, increase in bad mental health amongst our children. On every single well-being indicator, our county is failing, and we have to measure what we are doing with our money against that context. It seems to me enormously significant that in this budget we're taking £35 million away from people. That's away from children, that's away from vulnerable adults. And at the same time, we're building our bureaucracy with overpaid consultants and staff. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. We should be judging ourselves by the outcomes that we are producing and whether we are getting value for money for the people who pay the money in. Those are the taxpayers, the council taxpayers, including our staff. We are not. I think we need to have a real evaluation of what we mean by transformation. Transformation means change. It means a marked change in form or nature or appearance. That is not what we've got in these documents. What we've got in these documents concerning transformation is actually what should be good governance, and we should have been doing that all the while, not paying extra for it. It should be woven into our DNA. If we want real transformation, if you look at adult care, adult social services, what we need for real transformation are robust and resilient communities. Stop attacking our community and voluntary sector. What we need to support our old people is really good networks locally. We need good locality working. Let's stop over-centralising. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. We have not slashed services as others have predicted. We're very clear on the challenges facing children's services over the next year, and I'm very pleased that our new Director of Children's Services, Sally Hodges, has joined us this week. We need the very best person that we can find at whatever cost to help our children's service, and I'm very pleased that she has joined us. The budget for Children First Northamptonshire 2019-20 will be some £140 million and includes some £4.3 million to acknowledge pressures and inflation, which is a prudent approach, which I do welcome. I'm pleased that after listening to representations from user groups, particularly the Scouts and Guides, and the recommendations from scrutiny, the community use of school budget has been removed. This demonstrates that as an administration, we do listen and we do respond when we can. Other notable points in the children's budget include proposals against the use of agency staff, which remain a key focus of the department to convert and attract stable and sustainable workforce. We have saved £1.2 million in the children's services, using our facilities more efficiently by returning some children into county, which I know we all wanted, which has to be the right thing to do. Also, plans include investing in our own in-house provision, including the redevelopment of a secure unit at Deerfield and increasing occupancy at the council's own residential homes. Work has already begun to renegotiate contracts to drive the best value and return on behalf of our residents.
1 minute.
As well as to look at reducing costs, particularly in court by working smarter earlier in proceedings which will reduce costs. I'm also very pleased to say that the CCGs are supporting our short break service again. As I've already said, the challenge on improving children's service is very clear, and I'm satisfied that we now have the expertise and focus to do what is right. This coming year will be huge for our service, and I'm fully behind the proposal of the Children's First Directorate and, of course, the overall 2019-20 budget, and I commend it to colleagues to approve.
Thank you. Councillor Gough.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't actually expecting to speak either, to be honest.
You can all say no if you want to.
I will. You've given me the opportunity. I'll happily speak now, there, Chair. I did actually support the budget last year. I abstained on it, and much like Councillor Rumans, I think we had grave concerns about what was in that budget, and a lack of lack of confidence in that being delivered. And I mean, in some ways, we're justified by what happened since that budget last year. But compare that to this year, I think we're in a far better position. I think that things are ongoing. I think everyone's moving in the right direction. I think the officers and the commissioners and the cabinet should be commended for the work they've done. So I'm not going to speak much more, to be honest. I think it's a good budget. I wish the opposition could support it. If not, I wish they could at least provide some alternatives. But yeah, I think we should all be supporting this, and I think we should move on. I think we should hopefully make sure that we can keep to the budget and hopefully award that pay rise later in the year.
Thank you. Councillor Birch.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to just talk about some of the staffing issues in children's services. There are savings that have been made, and there's progress also. But the deletion of vacant posts, which has already been mentioned, the failure to recruit to vacant posts, and the removal of training budgets has been savings in the service. Now, is this something that we should be doing? The impact of the workload and capability of the staff is immense when the training and the pressures of covering for jobs that are not filled and jobs that have been deemed to be no longer necessary puts immense pressure on the existing staff. The staff are under enormous pressure to make decisions that are crucial. The kind of decisions that the staff make in children's services have long-lasting effects. We have huge numbers of children in this county that are living in poverty. We have a huge number of children in this county that are not in school, that are off-road, that are homeschooled. There are a huge number of children in this county that do not have access to the mental health provision they need. This has to be monitored and managed by our staff. And if we are not recruiting, if we are deleting posts and we are not training staff, I think this is a huge risk, and it is something that we should be thinking about putting back into the budget. And although there are good things going on, it is a risk that I feel that should be highlighted to this Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nadine Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's what's coming from our Labour colleagues, all this doom and gloom. When I became a Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care, I met with leaders, councillors, committee members, Cabinet members from all over the country who were facing the same budget pressures. And not to the extent that we were at NCC, their budgets were nowhere near my $250 million. And my mentor said to me, you simply have to do more with less. And doing so, and what we've done, and we are in course now to deliver an underspend of $5 million at the end of the year, which in the previous year was $16 million overspend. We are looking at adult social care differently. The culture is changing. We are being innovative and transformational. I'm sure on the opposition, they'll be focusing on the costs of the commissioners and the transformation director and the team. But I say today, Mr. Chairman, have they come up with any better ideas? We know the answer to that, don't we? No, they haven't. They haven't even produced an alternative budget. I say what we are doing and who we have brought in to help us is worth every penny, because you have to speculate to accumulate. And we are accumulating more than ever. We are accumulating trust, rebuilding relationships, providing statutory services for the most vulnerable residents of Northamptonshire, and saving money. There's new provision at Balmoral House. New projects are being discussed and being planned, which we will deliver. The detox figures are the lowest since 2016, and the figures yesterday were 22. We're able to monitor the actual figures in hospital across Northamptonshire with the Shrewd software
so we can plan for increased numbers proactively. You can even download an app on your phone called Waitless, which tells you right now how many people are waiting to be seen at hospital. But, Mr. Chairman, we should never become complacent. There is always more to do, and we have to stay on budget. And just to finish, if I may, Mr. Chairman, no one knows what the adult social care footprint will be like as we go towards 2 unitary councils. But I do know that adult social care will be in a much better position than it was a year ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Strachan. No? Okay, thank you, Councillor Strachan. Councillor Morris.
Yes, as I stand here, I reflect on many of the views that Councillor Naden-Hawley and Councillor Brown reflected on earlier. This budget is very much about reduction. It's not about reductions in service. This is why I think our Labour colleagues and our Liberal Democrat colleagues sometimes get a little bit annoyed, because they feel that if it was about reductions, they could go on about those rather a lot. Unfortunately, they don't really have the chance to do that, because this isn't about reduction. This is about getting the maximum value out of the Northamptonshire pound for the people of Northamptonshire, and that is what we are trying to achieve. We also have a 3-year plan, in that we have a 3-year budget for 3 years consecutively, which we have very, very rarely had. This is something that will transition into the unitary status and gives a very stable platform for those unitaries going forward. In place, which does have a substantial budget as well, it's worth noting that in 1920, certain measures are going back in. We've already discussed the gritting routes that are going back to their full level next year. However, it is worth mentioning that we've already put back 250,000 into this year's gritting service as well. And we've listened to the people of Northamptonshire and those that lobbied us, and when we can afford to do it, we have done it. We've also agreed that we will fill the grit bins again and replace those that we have been taken out. So I think that is a good result. We are also reinstating the current year's reductions on road marking maintenance, traffic signal maintenance and weed killing. We're also returning to the previous levels of inspections and monitoring of roads, carriageways, bridges, rights-of-ways and verges. We're also taking a deep look into the management of school transport and making sure that our policies are fit for purpose and well managed. If you look at our budget, it's actually gone up. It's gone up by 5.3 million in this current budget of 1920. So to say that we are cutting is just not true. We are actually investing in our services and getting more out of it for the people of Northamptonshire. Thank you, Chair.
You're cutting the grass there, aren't you? Councillor Meredith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, I want to give you some reality about this budget. You say, Councillor Morris said, it's crowing about how good this budget is. But I'm going to give you some reality. This budget is full of cuts, whether you like it or not. We're going to see cuts to children's social care. We're going to see cuts to adult social care. We're going to see cuts to roads. And I could go on. I could go on. This is a budget which I can't support. Councillor Stone has spoke previously about the people suffering, young people suffering, people relying on food banks. And I have said in this council chamber, how many times does the residents say to me, what do they get out of the county council? And I still say to you this, they get nothing. They get nothing from this council. They get nothing. They get nothing. Whether you like it or not, they get nothing. And also, you had a wonderful chance to help our staff, and you chose to turn it down. You chose to turn it down. And I hope the staff know that. And I hope the staff look at the recorded votes to see who voted against that. And this is a Conservative budget. And you was bowed out by your Conservative friends at Westminster. So don't go crowing how good this budget is. It is a calamity. A calamity. All I can see in this budget, and I've been through these papers, is cuts, cuts, cuts. Whether you like it or not, That is what is in it. Now, the other thing I'd like to say, I've always had respect for Councillor Clark, but I've got no respect for him now. And I think his attitude when he attacked myself and Councillor Stramber is appalling, and I hope you take him to task on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would have interrupted on that one, but you did in fact call another councillor by a different name, so I think he was just responding by calling you by a different name.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, this is not acceptable, and I will be taking him to the standards.
Thank you very much, Councillor Meredith. Right, Councillor Roy is next. Councillor Roy.
Apologies, Chairman, I didn't hear you. Sorry, apologies, Chairman, I didn't hear you.
That's right.
So thank you, Chairman, councillors, members of the public. This is my first budget on this side of the chamber. I've been in the public gallery in other budget sessions, and that's why I'm always very pleased to hear members of the public coming to give their opinions. And I was very impressed with the chairman's remarks at the start of the meeting, where he was calling for people to be treated with respect, to not be spoken over, to not be interrupted or laughed at or anything else. And I was very impressed with that. And that was why I was very concerned when a member of the public was interrupted and told that he couldn't use certain language, and that is a matter of concern for me. I'm also concerned about Councillor Griffiths and his ad hominem attacks on me as an individual. And I'm really disappointed that he isn't here for me to have a conversation with him. Having said that, maybe his Conservative colleagues could give him a message that I would welcome an opportunity.
Point of order under 15.4, Mr. Chairman. I was admonished earlier for not sticking to the matter on the agenda paper. This is a debate about the budget. Maybe Councillor Roy can return to the budget.
Councillor Brown, you're dead right. I was just about to press the button to say exactly the same. I'm sorry, but could you keep to the budget?
I'm referring to Councillor Griffith's statement on the budget that referred to me as an individual.
No. Well, could you keep to the budget?
So if it was good enough for Councillor Griffiths to make on the budget, it's good enough for me to respond to.
Well, I prefer you not to. Can you keep to the budget, please? If you think that Councillor Griffith did it wrong, let him do it wrong, you do it right. Thank you.
So, pass on the message. Happy to have a conversation. Arise to talk about the impact that this budget has on the voluntary and community sector
35 seconds.
In the county, with large amounts of money being taken out of the economy, with 1.3 million taken in the last financial year out of the Community Foundation, and more taken out in terms of the swathing cuts to particularly sensory impairment charities. There have been huge cuts in terms of particularly the sector in Northamptonshire. And what that means is the sector has less capability to lever in money. That means that the nice to do that we previously as authority did cannot be done by third sector organisations. I would hope that the councillors on this side and our side understands the contribution of this particular sector and understands the impact that this budget has on that sector.
Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chair. I want to just raise a few things into reaction to what's been said, but I was in a position to attend quite a lot of the budget scrutiny. Towards the end, I had a bit more free time than earlier on. What I noticed in that was it was really well attended by opposition, which is good. Some of them, some more than others. But I don't remember at any point in that, amongst all the challenge, anyone saying this absolutely won't work. No one said that. There was some caution. We're a little bit cautious about this, or we've got some concerns. We'd like to get updated on this as we go along. But nobody ever said, this is rubbish, this won't work, I can't accept this budget. So we went through all that process, and my overall feeling from that process was that it was cautiously accepted. So to my mind, then, this is just party politics playing out, which is fine. That's fine. If that's, you know, we'll play the game. But I just wanted to say that. In terms of transformation, Councillor Stone said it should be part of our DNA, and you're absolutely right, it should be. But sadly, it wasn't. That was the whole problem, it wasn't. So the only way we can make these changes is by now investing in it. Simple as that. So we all believe in transformation. It should have been happening. It wasn't. So we're dealing with it now. That's all we can do. Councillor Meredith, the only thing I'd say when you said about, when you asked the public, you know, what do we get from the council, and they say nothing, that is a little bit harsh on the staff, and I know that you wouldn't mean that to be. I absolutely know that, because a lot of people don't see what the council do, even though they're driving on the roads. But fortunately, most of us don't benefit from adult social care or children's services. It's very invisible to a lot of people, yet that is what takes up a lot of the money. So people do, because we are looking after our vulnerable children, and we are meeting our statutory duties to do that at the moment.
1 minute.
Just on the, in terms of, I think, Councillor Birch, we do have an active recruitment campaign for social workers at the moment. So we are looking to increase the number of social workers and the number of permanent social workers. And we have, in the budget, I don't understand where these cuts are, because we're actually investing 1.2 million into children's services. But really, just in summary, it's just to say, I'm slightly confused, because I felt there was very much a general cautious support to the budget in scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Andy Mercer.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to start off by talking about the increase in council tax. In previous years, going back 10 years, when I was on this council, I listened to members of the opposition regularly criticising us for not increasing council tax by the maximum allowable. I did a quick calculation, and I reckoned that if we had done so as they requested, council tax would be something like 10 or 12% higher now. So by increasing it by 5%, we are around 5% lower than that they wanted, and yet they said it's too high. Boom. Right, next I'd like to talk a little bit about transformation. Transformation is always a risky activity. You put in place your best estimates of what's going to happen. You have robust processes for verifying what's going on and how you're implementing it, but there is always risks involved. You can't assume that all the savings that you hope for are going to be made. Therefore, you've got to over-target. You've got to aim for getting more than you actually need, because you don't think you'll get all of what you wanted. That's why this budget is fragile. There's no question about that. We're starting off with a level of reserves that's way too low, a contingency that's way too low, and we're embarking on a number of risky ventures. Now, we've done our best to de-risk them, and we're putting in enough extra effort that we hopefully can get there, and we've got some of the best people in the sector. But that still means it's fragile. We could be blown off course by a major financial problem in the country, for instance. No, like staying in. Now, there's a couple of other points I'd like to make, and that is that the sole purpose of this council is to deliver services. People need to remember that. We're not here just to keep this building full. We're here to deliver services. I'm aware I've only got a minute. And that should be tattooed onto your soul. That is the number one thing we're doing, and that's what we've got to keep doing. Everything else is subsidiary to delivering our services. Final point I'd make is that I was very impressed by Councillor Stamborough saying that he would not be supporting this budget because we didn't support the amendment. So I take it from that he supports everything else in it, and therefore we'll be voting for it. Well done.
Thank you, Councillor Mercer. Councillor McGee.
Thank you, Chair. To support this budget, you have to have confidence in it. I listened to your finance spokesman. He didn't even sound confident delivering it, and yet you expect us to have confidence in it. We don't. We don't. And let's get one thing right. The fact, the truth. The only reason you can deliver a budget like this is because your government bailed you out by allowing you to use millions this year. That's the only reason. Otherwise, we'd still be passing a huge debt on to the next unitaries when they come. So there's nothing to be proud of here. What you've done is a destruction of this council. A decade of destruction of services. Worst schools in the country. Worst schools, some of the most failing schools in the country, failing children's services run at the time by your leader. Failing children's services, closing libraries. So don't sit there and reinvent yourselves as a nice party. You are the nasty party, and Northamptonshire has felt that for years. For years they felt it. So don't reinvent yourselves. It's not true. It is just not true. You're a nasty party. And what did, it's true. What did upset me was, at all costs, we'll get the right people. No disrespect to the new director, I'm sure she is very capable. Shame you can't say that about your own frontline staff. They're worth as much as that. But we'll pay the director no matter what it costs, but we can't even give the staff a pay rise. Shame on you. Absolute shame. They're the ones out delivering the stuff that the director asked them to do. And this is not your budget, it's a commissioner's budget and the officer's budget. That's who this budget belongs to, and that's why it's a better budget than you've had for the last 10 years. Because you get bailed out and it was delivered by the commissioners and the officers. So don't reinvent yourselves. You have got more splits in that party than I've seen anywhere. Some of you have still got knife marks in. You've still got knife marks in your backs sitting there. So don't have a go at us. And one more thing, Chair, before I finish. Why would we put an opposition budget again? Waste officers' time. Done it for 10 years. Have you listened? No, you didn't listen. In fact, Max Carla said if you had listened, and it's in the recommendations, to some of the things we put forward, you wouldn't be in such a mess. So why would we waste officers' time for you to throw it out? You're a nasty party and you continue to be so.
Thank you, Councillor McGee. Councillor Chown.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to speak. A lot of what I wanted to say has actually been said very well by my colleagues previously, but I just want to elaborate on a few points. Initially, when I heard about the rise in council tax, it went against the grain, being Conservative. However, I also felt that after discussions with the leader as a group, we felt we could support this rise in council tax because it was felt that through this rise, we'll be able to reinstate some services back, and which is very important to give back to the residents of Northamptonshire something towards what they're paying with. But at the same point, I'd like to reiterate a point that we are still the second lowest paying county, Shire county, in the country. And I think that needs to be noted by the public. The other thing I wanted to actually say was just say a few words about my own division and the changes that I've seen taking place. Now, I'd like to personally thank Teresa, Lucy Whiteman, the libraries team, and the cabinet members as well for supporting a few months ago. And the feeling's very, very different in this budget to what it was last year. I think we were all dreading the decisions that we had to take last year. And in comparison, the feeling that I have is a lot more confidence than I did last year as well. And going back to my own library in St James, we're now in a position where the officers have worked with me and another organisation called Goodwill Solutions to find a solution for the library going forward, which means, you know, we've been working together more collaboratively, sorry. The other thing I wanted to say was, Ian Morris mentioned highways. I've seen a big change in my division with highways as well. We've seen roads that are finally being adopted. We're seeing a lot of improvements, and residents are feeding back with that. So taking that all in mind, there is still room for, into consideration. There is still room for improvement. There's a lot that needs to happen, but I'm happy and confident supporting this budget going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Irving-Swift. No. Okay, thank you. Councillor Scrimshaw. No, sorry. No, not Councillor Scrimshaw. We moved somebody around. Councillor Eales, yes.
The moment you've all been waiting for. Well, look,
you seem to be popular, Councillor Eales.
Yeah, really popular. But well, I'm actually going to disappoint you, I think, because I'm going to start somewhere you probably didn't expect me to, and I'm going to acknowledge that there's a lot of hard work going on within this authority, from within the administration, from within the commissioners, and of course our frontline staff to try and turn things around. I may fundamentally disagree with some of the ideology that you adopt, but I acknowledge that there is some good work going on, and there is indeed some good things within this budget. But you've got to wait for the punchline, folks. You've got to wait for the punchline. But it is an inconvenient truth. It is an inconvenient truth as to how we got here. It's for years of financial mismanagement, years of council tax freezes, which you did for political gain, when you ignored the request for incremental council tax rises, when the 50% cut to local government funding from your government voted through by your MPs. That's a statement of fact. It is also an inconvenient truth that the people of this county were the victims of political fraud in 2017, where you deliberately held back the state of the finances of this authority, and that is the truth. Now, things are moving forward, but we're not out of the woods yet. In fact, you know what a bear does in the woods. That's really where this authority is. And you can only sell Angel Square once. But I have one fundamental issue with this budget, and it's around the 5% council tax rise. People are struggling enough. We've seen the explosion of insecure employment since 2010. We've got the increased use of food banks, the cost of living rising, wages down in real terms. People simply cannot afford to pay for your mistakes. Now, there are some good things in the budget, as I said earlier on. Don't clap again. I of course want to see winter gritting reintroduced. But the fundamental issue I have is the fact that there is a democratic deficit in what you're proposing to do. It is the norm that not only would you normally consult with the people of this county on your budget and what you propose in terms of a council tax rise, you've not consulted with the people of this county about a 4.99% council tax rise. You've not taken it to the people via referendum as per the norm. It is simply wrong to impose a council tax rise where not one single person in this county has been asked whether they agree with it or not. That is fundamentally wrong. So if you had the courage of your convictions, if you really believed that what's in front of us is the right thing to do, then why don't you put it to the people that we're all elected to represent? And on that principled basis, I will have to vote against.
Thank you, Councillor. Now, Councillor Scrimshaw, because I called him first, and then, just so you know who's going to be called next, it'll be Councillor Scrimshaw, then Councillor Eakins, then Councillor Hughes. Then we shall be going to Councillor Galby and then the proposer. Okay, so Councillor Scrimshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to respond to a few points that have been made about the Labour Group not putting forward an alternative budget. And I'd simply ask that the administration councillors politely ask that you please don't try and make cheap political points about this. It might be said by some that in this chamber in the past I have indulged in making those sort of political points. No. But I'd like to quote Councillor Clark. We need to remind ourselves of where we are. Councillor Goldby, the situation is very, very challenging, and that's why we haven't put forward an alternative budget. I recommended to the Labour group that we shouldn't do so, because actually to do so would be irresponsible. We would have simply taken up time from the finance team, this very difficult, challenging times when, frankly, they've got better things to do, and we would have been doing that just to make political points. We'd have been damned if we do that. We're damned if we haven't done that. What we have a duty to do as an opposition is to give an honest, frank, once for all and genuine assessment of what we think about the budget. And before you criticise some of the things we've said, think about what we said. They might have been slightly clearer, they might have been more obvious, but actually I was saying the things that your own finance portfolio holder has said. I was saying the things that some of your council have said. This budget is risky. Now, like Councillor Auger, I understand politics. You guys are going to vote it through. We're not. But you're only voting it through because you have to. We have to set the budget. I understand that. It isn't the budget that's going to get us out of the problems we've got, but hopefully it will transform, it will lead on to a better situation in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Eakins. I've got his name right.
Thank you, Chair. First thing, Chair, if I may come through you and say that I take it a personal offence when I'm called member of a nasty party. Says by the members of the party that actually, shall we say, embraces some of their members who, shall we just say, they like intolerance, they like racism, they like insensitivity, they like anti-Semitism.
Okay,
that's
I think we'll keep away from that.
So we'll get on with that one. That comes from their party, and that's not from me, Chair.
No.
That's from the 8 people who resigned this week from their party.
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we've heard from my opposition colleagues on my left the purveyors of doom and gloom. They have no alternate budget because they didn't have time to get one together. That's what was stated earlier. We didn't have time. Well, they've actually really gone against the actual core of their job here. Their basic duty as opposition, Mr. Chair, is to present an alternate budget. But they failed. They failed the people of Northamptonshire. But I have to say, on this side of the House, we haven't. Mr. Chair, if I may say, 28 years ago, I was asked 3 questions by a chap. First question is, where do I live? Wellingborough, I said. How long you lived there? He says. All my life. Where were you born? In the Barrow. Why, you may ask? Why are those questions asked? Well, because he said to me, I qualify. What did I qualify to do? I qualify to represent a Northamptonshire alliance in playing rugby. We played in a competition, we went on to win that competition. I played in the front row as part of the engine room of a team that went on to win. Mr. Chair, why is it relevant now? 18 months ago, Mr. Chairman, I was also part of a team. I was part of that team as the engine room. I'm glad to say, Mr. Chairman, that 18 months on, not only did we produce a balancing budget, hopefully in 2 or 3 months' time to finish off 2018-19, but we're also here to present a balanced budget for 2019 and 2020. We put this council back on track. All the members, officers and staff of the NCC put this train back on its track. And I can say that again, that being as I was one of the persons who was part of that engine to make that happen, along with other members, along with other officers and the people who work here, I can actually say that I am proud to be of Northamptonshire Alliance, an alliance that will continue to deliver the services that the people of Northamptonshire not only want, but that they deserve.
Thank you. Councillor Dudley Hughes.
Thank you, Chairman. The council does very little to support the youth work of the county, so I'm absolutely delighted that we are able to support all those volunteers who give up hours and hours, not only in the Scouts, but in lots of other organisations, when they give up their time to run youth activities. Now, we all know the motto of Scouts is to be prepared, and I do hope, as a corporate parent, I remind you we're all corporate parents, that the youth services that looks after our young people is going to be prepared, despite all the cuts, despite all the talk, to look after those young people, because I'm very concerned, along with many councillors, with all of you are, that our young people should be looked after. The lists should be kept to a minimum, that of waiting lists, and that our social workers should be encouraged to stay. And I know when I was chairman, I went to meet some social workers, and one of the things that kept them here was the fact they saw the opportunity for training and advancement. So I do hope in all our financial woes, we're able to still encourage youth workers to stay with training and advancement. Because as well as the money, they realise there isn't a pot of gold, and they do realise they could get paid more to go somewhere else. But many of them are loyal to Northamptonshire because they like working in Northamptonshire. They do need to be supported, though. The third thing is, I'd like to say, is that although I'm not happy that we're not able to fund a pay rise for our employees at this moment, I will support the budget on the promise that we've had that they will get a pay rise, because it's so important. I work a lot in schools, and the pay rise is seen as not just the money, although of course everybody needs the money, but also a token of appreciation of all the work they do, both actually the paid work they do, and in the case of the workers who work for our young people in this county, the unpaid work they do well outside the hours when they're actually technically employed. So I do hope that that promise will be kept, and I will support the budget on that premise, and when we all do our recorded vote, I hope that we're also accepting that promise. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Golby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We stand here today approaching the end of a civic year, which has been the single most challenging financial year of this organisation's long history. This has been a year which has seen our financial position played out on the national and reported across the globe. This has meant that the great name of this county has been increasingly used in a negative way and represented in the terms of a public service financial failure. But today is a day that we draw a line under this tumultuous period. Although I acknowledge there is still much to do, we now need to start to build the pride back in our county and the public services which work within it. Fragile has been mentioned a few times today, but maybe that is where we've come from. But this budget today before us moves us on in terms of sustainability and lays that foundation as we move on towards our unitary goals and targets. But today's budget vote marks a significant new chapter for public services in Northamptonshire. So it's time to stop talking the county down. It is time to reflect positively on all that has been achieved over the last 12 months to stabilise our finances and begin the journey of transforming public services and put them in the best possible position to transition into unitary councils, if and when, of course, they are created in the county. As councillors, it is right that we reflect on what has happened financially over the past 12 months and acknowledge just how far we've come since this organisation's darkest hour at the beginning of this year. Firstly, it is becoming increasingly apparent that we will balance this year's budget. Let us not lose sight of what an achievement that would be. At one point, and has been referred to today, this year, this organisation had to find a way to bridge a colossal £64.2 million gap. When I became leader, I promised my councillor colleagues, all of us here today, our district and borough partners, our MPs and government, that I would do everything in my power to grip and put the finances of this authority back on track. There were few who thought we would get anywhere near achieving this. Through a combination of the leadership of our new Chief Executive, Teresa Grant, our new leadership team, who are here today, the oversight and insight of the Commissioners, the tireless dedication of our staff who have been mentioned already today, we continue to rise to the challenge set out before us. Secondly, it's through this process that we have started to regain the trust and confidence of central government. The Commissioners have worked relentlessly on the county's behalf to secure the capital dispensation afforded to us by central government, and which I thank them for. Some people glibly say that we have only managed to balance our budget because of this dispensation. But let's not make the mistake. But let there be no mistake, sorry. This would not have happened without the work of the Commissioners, and it would not have happened if the government did not have the confidence and the faith that we are turning the corner and we're taking back control of our finances. The capital dispensation was a one-off freedom afforded to us to use Northamptonshire's resources to tackle Northamptonshire's problems. Colleagues, we've spoken lots about the budget today. Our colleagues over the other side haven't put anything forward that we could consider. But I can assure everybody here that we're working tirelessly on behalf of the residents of Northamptonshire, and that is the bottom line. that binds us all as councillors. We're working for the residents and we're on that journey of unitary, and much of that has been in the news lately. But the bottom line is we're doing everything we possibly can to deal with the financial situation of this council and deal with this, putting the services in the best position we possibly can as we move forward. I've got quite a bit more to say here, but I'm going to summarise that this budget...
I'm sorry, I'm being reminded you can't continue any longer. I'm afraid.
Okay.
I've given you an extra
Well, I recommend this budget to
minute.
Council, and I expect all of our colleagues to support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm sorry you couldn't finish, but to be fair, I've given you all the extra seconds that everybody else has run over. And as it's come from the leader about the budget, that's why I've done it. But I can't do it any longer. Sorry. Right, Councillor Longley, you've got 5 minutes to do yours.
Thank you, Chairman. I shan't take 5 minutes.
Good.
I'll start by saying really that I've listened to everybody here today, and thank you very much indeed. But I'm bound to say I've not heard anything of substance that would cause me to change my mind in any way. I think that this budget has been put together with our very talented staff, our commissioners, the CEO, all the members here. I don't intend to change it. Of course, events might prove differently. The one item that did come out, I thought, was of significance was the emerging savings proposal by Councillor Stanbury. Still there, right? Yeah, right. I think that's a good idea. Because I do happen to know that our CEO has got a very good monitoring process that we're going to follow through, and Paul over there will be behind that. So as you will remember, you come along every time before Cabinet. We fill you in on whatever details we can, so you have as much knowledge of that as we have before the Cabinet. And I think this is a good opportunity at that point to do precisely that with the savings. Let's move forward. So that's all I've got to say on that. Other than I thought I might just take a moment to say two key points of time I remember along this process. And one of them was when is she still there? Yes, she is. A young lady up there in the press asked me to try and see what confidence I had. You may recall, sir. Yeah. And my response was no, I'm going back now to November, something like that. My response to that was, I'm encouraged. And she persevered. So I kept saying, I'm encouraged. And I did say, in the new year, I'd give you an update. Do you recall? And so I can now safely say, I'm greatly encouraged. The other key point was when what was then our new CEO put together the first programme where we were going. And I remember we were all a bit sceptical, as one is on these occasions, and see what's happened. New guy in town, as it were. And at the end of it, I was very impressed with it. And I think my term was, we're on our way. Do you recall? And I recall what your response was to that as well, but I won't quote it here. So therefore, I'll wrap up because this is all about confidence. I've told you about the team game, and that will continue. And I do include the opposition, because I think you've got some ideas. We've obviously got some confidence from the government. I won't run through the items again. But I will restate the 3 points I finished with, and that's the commissioners, the staff, and all the members. We are dedicated, and I mean that word, to pass on the very best financial position we are capable of delivering. We're going to do that. And I'll say again, NCC has sufficient resources to deliver, and we can and will, as far as on my watch, we will live within our means. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There will now be a recorded vote on that motion.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Auger. For. Councillor Fiona Baker. For. Councillor Jane Birch. Against. Councillor Elizabeth Bowen. For. Councillor Wendy Brackenbury. For. Councillor Rebecca Breeze is absent. Councillor Julie Brookfield. Against. Councillor Adam Brown. For. Councillor Robin Brown is absent. Councillor Pinder Chowan. For. Councillor Michael Clark. For. Councillor Julie Davenport. Absent. Councillor Gareth Eales. Against. Councillor Scott Edwards. For. Councillor John Eakins. For Councillor Matt Golby. For Councillor Andre Gonzalez de Savage. For Councillor Rob Goff. For Councillor Martin Griffiths. Is absent. Councillor Jim Hakewill. Against. Councillor Eileen Hales. Against. Councillor Mike Hallam. For Councillor Amy Howard is absent. Councillor Dudley Hughes. For Councillor Sylvia Hughes. For Councillor Cecile Irving-Swift. For Councillor Andrew Kilbride. For Councillor Graham Lawman. For Councillor Stephen Legg. For Councillor Malcolm Longley. For Councillor Arthur McCutcheon. Absent. Councillor John McGee. Against. Councillor Alan Matthews. For Councillor Andrew Mercer. For Councillor Jill Mercer. For Councillor Dennis Meredith. Against. Councillor Ian Morris. For Councillor Sandra Naden-Hawley. For Councillor Steve Osborne. For Councillor Bill Parker. For Councillor Suresh Patel. For Councillor Victoria Perry. For Councillor Anjona Roy. Against. Councillor Sam Rumans. For Councillor Adil Sadigov is absent. Councillor Bob Scott. Against. Councillor Mick Scrimshaw. Against. Councillor Judy Shepherd. For Councillor Chris Smith-Haynes. For Councillor Jason Smithers. For Councillor Chris Stamborough. Against. Councillor Danielle Stone. Against. Councillor Winston Strachan. Against. Councillor Michael Tighe. For Councillor Alan Walker. For and Councillor Malcolm Waters. Thank you.
Not here. The result is 36 for the motion and 13 against the motion, no abstentions. So the motion's carried. Right, we've got one more item left on the agenda. I propose that we continue to do it. Are you all happy with that? Yeah, okay. Right then, I'm going to invite Mrs. Alison Richards to talk on the next item, please. Mrs. Alison Richard, you will have 3 minutes when you get here anyway. Right.
Thank you, Chair. Let's have a conversation about heritage. Just last week, we saw school pupils going on strike and making public protests because of their concern that this planet will have no legacy to hand on to their children. There may be no heritage. So I quote from Appendix 1. We all share pride in the heritage and history of Northamptonshire, belief in the ability of the people to build united and vibrant communities, and a strong desire to improve outcomes for everyone. This enhanced relationship with residents relies on a new conversation in which we are all partners with equally important roles to play. The Council plan also contains these ambitious words: narrowing the gap in achievement for vulnerable children and young people, improving education progress, attainment and skills at all key stages and throughout adulthood. So I ask you, how do children and adults learn? We live in a society where the written word is paramount. Literacy is essential, and none of those striking children could manage without it. They know what heritage means. When some of you were elected as councillors in 2017, you inherited a very difficult situation. The last 20 months have not been easy, and the finances still look very uncertain. But why would you choose to put at further risk the educational and life achievements for any of our children and young people, including the vulnerable ones, by removing 17 out of 36 public libraries from your statutory provision? At no cost to the individual, at the point of borrowing, residents of this county have access to a large book stock through the present statutory system. The current library proposals may see reductions in that system. In 22 different communities, volunteers are going to do their best to keep some sort of library service going. Some will succeed, others won't, and in 17 of the 22, the millstone of property costs may weigh so heavily that potential success is undermined from the word go. I urge you to consider what the ongoing cost is going to be for our library communities and specifically for the children there. My conversation to you is that you should safeguard the heritage of those children and do nothing to reduce their opportunities to acquire and enhance vital literacy skills. It's a big step to remove 17 libraries from your responsibilities, to leave them subject to the vagaries of grant funding, the priorities of town and parish councils, and the input in terms of time and money of hundreds of unpaid volunteers, not staff. Survival for some libraries will be precarious.
Can you finish, please?
Are you willing to recognise that and to take your responsibilities for the heritage of literacy in this county seriously? I hope you will. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite Councillor Golby to move the report. You have 5 minutes, Councillor Golby.
Okay, well, I won't be long, Chairman, because we've had a long debate already today, haven't we? So the council plan, I'm very pleased to present that to council, and of course it is a very important strategic document. It sets the direction of travel for the next 2 years, although I'm sure all of our members here are very clear on the challenges that face us and where we are, given what we've just talked about. The key themes of the plan include stabilisation, transformation and transition, and they are, as we've discussed this morning, the key pillars of the budget and getting to grips with the financial situation we've already discussed. I think we all recognise the challenges we face and recognise the progress we've already made on delivering those pillars as we move forward over the next 2 years or so. But key to those, as is mentioned in the plan, is how we work with our partners, whether it's health, our the districts and boroughs, the police, and even our schools. Of course, we've got to keep our eye on the ball in terms of wanting those best possible outcomes for all of our children in our education system. And of course there's the economy and our local economy and employment, employability and the skills agenda, and that is something that we've not been able to focus that much of our attention on given the issues that we've been dealing with, that we've been talking about again today. But key, I was challenged at Cabinet last week. It was by Councillor Stamber. He said, okay, this is the plan, where's the detail? But I think the detail is in the documents and the plan of the budget that we've been talking about today. And underpinning that is the transformation strategy, which is key to delivery of the budget next year. So overall, I'm very pleased that we have this council plan in place, and I recommend it to council. And I'm happy to listen to any comments, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Irving Swift, you're second then.
I would like to second and reserve the right to speak.
Thank you. Right, we have 3 speakers. Councillor Hakewell is the first one.
Thank you, Chairman. Page 3, our vision for Northamptonshire. What I would like to ask the leader is, what direction was given by central government on the proportionality of the shadow board that caused so much upset between borough and district? The second point, really, Chairman, is a statement. It's pretty rich on page number 6, and this is the council plan describing what we're talking about, what we do, to actually find the only photograph on page 6 is activities in our libraries, which, as we've already heard from the speaker, are being cut back and slashed. We were very keen to identify the additional 2% and reinstigating services like gritting and the scouts, the uniforms. It would have been really nice with another U-turn on that. but it seems pretty ironic that you can only choose a picture of libraries, which there are hundreds of volunteers across this county who still do not know the future for their libraries because of the nature of the data still coming out from here. So the question is, what direction came from central government regarding the proportionality of county versus borough and district? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brookfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to bring out in this report the two statements. One is the contribution, how the decision contributes to the council plan, which is, as our speaker earlier said, narrowing the gap in achievement for vulnerable children and young people. And I also want to pick out another statement, which is about addressing inequalities and enabling those young people to contribute and lead an independent life. I have never, in the 14 years I've been on this council, brought an individual case of a resident to this council chamber because I've always felt that it was inappropriate, but this has such wide-reaching implications that I feel that today I must. It's based on our education and health care plans. And I want to know from this council, as we go forward, how much money is being saved from those plans, because I have just heard in the last 48 hours that one of my residents has had his plan just stopped, ceased. He's halfway through a college course. His place at that college is no longer going to be funded. I'm so angry and upset by this, and I know that there must be other cases where education and healthcare plans have been ceased. Arbitrarily, just like that, just to save money. This is not right. So this is an example of the suffering that we're seeing because of the implementation of such a council plan and also the budget that you have just agreed. It is not fair. We've got young people suffering because of this. And I will be working with our new Director for Children, thank you. I will be working with our new Director, Sally. I look forward to meeting her because I want to know what is happening to the scheme on the education and healthcare plans. 7 years ago, this council was a pilot for these plans and we have been proud of them ever since. We know that if we have care based around the individual needs of a person, that it will succeed and enable them to lead an independent life. This young man is incredibly, he has very complex needs, has great disabilities, and I think we've let down our partners in health by not helping him further.
Thank you. Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I've spent many years, far too many really, I suppose, in helping people prepare plans. In my view, this is not a plan. Plans contain things that are smart, that are measurable, that are timed, that are concrete, that are deliverable, that we can measure. This is not a plan. It's like an evangelical document, and it's not fit for purpose, and it's no good referring us to the budget. The budget is something that is supposed to follow the plan, not substitute for it. One of the things that I want to see in a county plan, any plan where I'm a representative supporting people in the communities, is something that's going to make their lives better. What is it exactly we're going to do to ameliorate the poverty in Castle Ward, where I'm the borough councillor? What are we going to be doing to ameliorate all the difficulties people have in Abington and Fitzroy, where I am the county councillor? There is nothing that is reassuring to me in this plan whatsoever. One of the things that I have wanted to see for a very long time is an anti-poverty strategy. We have so many people now in our county, in our towns, in our boroughs and districts who are suffering the worst impacts of food poverty, fuel poverty, income poverty, even while they are working families. and we are doing nothing to address that issue at all. Corby rates 35th out of 322 local authorities in terms of the poverty indices. Northampton is 89th out of 322, and it scores worse than a borough like Newham, which has always suffered really serious economic disadvantage. Until we face these issues and we have a plan which does what it says somewhere in these documents, which is an end to silo working, which is about co-designing and co-delivery, which is about investing to make money, we are not doing the people in this county any good at all. We need to do an awful lot better than this.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Auger.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I get this. This is strategic, very visionary, and I think in all organisations we need that sort of signposting. It's just a request to the leader on whether he would consider the last paragraph of your forward. You mentioned about working together. I'm just wondering whether you would include the following. You said only by working together as residents, public sector organisations, business and communities, we can create a stronger, more sustainable and vibrant county. I'm wondering if you could put in voluntary agencies as well, the voluntary sector. That is so important, and they have been so important in delivering the services to the public, supporting this council in delivering certainly preventative work, and I'm wondering whether you'd consider just tipping in the voluntary sector, making a specific note of them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. With no more speakers, I shall go back to the proposer. Sorry, you reserve your right to speak. Seconder. Councillor Irving-Swift.
Thank you so much. And before speaking, I will go to Mr. Akrell, who was speaking about the library. I remind you, we are still in consultation and no decision have been taken. So, as my previous colleague said, it's a visionary document. So what you read, I think a lot of council in this country have the same vision and aspiration. What is very important, it's a conversation in Northamptonshire. And we need to change the conversation. From the opposition today, I just have heard negativity. If we carry on like that, we are going to dig a hole. What it is here, it's aspirational, and it is our core value. We are here to safeguard the most vulnerable, and that we will do very well. I think the key word in this is partnership, transparency, and transformation. So with this in mind, we should start positive conversation with everybody, because frankly, my residents, and you might not meet the same residents that I represent, but the residents that I represent are tired of everyone telling us that Northamptonshire is not a good place to live, because they are proud to live in Northamptonshire, they want to play their role, and they want to have a good well-being and be doing what is right for them, to be independent as long as they can, and the most vulnerable have to be helped by us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Back to you then, Councillor Galvin, to sum up. I think
Thank you, Chair. Just to agree with Councillor Irving-Swift, the fact is with the libraries, we haven't closed any libraries yet. No. We've been re-examining them, or we haven't closed any libraries, and we've been re-examining them off the back of the sentiment that was felt at this very meeting a year ago. So we've gone and revisited those. Councillor Irving-Swift has worked very hard on making sure that people have been listened to, and there's been some good work with the Chief Exec that, you know, we're in a different position. There's still a way to go, I understand. Councillor Brookfield talked about EHC plans, and I think that's something that needs to be picked up with the Director, but I know how hard our staff have worked on the implementation of the EHC plans, and I would hate to think that those are arbitrarily being stopped, as you suggest, so we need to get that checked out. Councillor Stone talks about some of the areas of her area, and of course they're concerning to her, but we all represent different areas that have different challenges, and we need to remind ourselves that this, as has been pointed out, is a high-level strategic plan. We need to have this plan in place, acknowledge the challenges of where we are, acknowledge the fact we've got to transform our services to become sustainable as we move through this unitary journey, and we are all, as an administration, are highly committed to that. Councillor Auger's point, I'll be happy to take that away and look at putting that into the plan, and I have had a couple of other suggestions from other members as well of some other things that they felt could have been in there. So I'm happy to look at those, revisit those and put them into the plan. But overall I'm happy to commend this to members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, we now go to the vote, which again will be recorded.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Auger. For. Councillor Fiona Baker. For. Councillor Jane Birch. Against. Councillor Elizabeth Bowen. For. Councillor Wendy Brackenbury. For. Councillor Rebecca Breeze is absent. Councillor Judy Brookfield. Against. Councillor Adam Brown. For. Councillor Robin Brown is absent. Councillor Pinder Chowan. For. Councillor Michael Clark. For. Councillor Julie Davenport. Against. Councillor Gareth Eales. Against. Councillor Scott Edwards. For. Councillor John Eakins. For. Councillor Matt Golby. For. Councillor Andre Gonzalez de Savage. For. Councillor Rob Goff. For. Councillor Martin Griffiths is absent. Councillor Jim Hakewill. Against. Councillor Eileen Hales. Against. Councillor Mike Hallam. For. Councillor Amy Howard is absent. Councillor Dudley Hughes is absent. Councillor Sylvia Hughes is absent. Councillor Cecile Irving Swift. For. Councillor Andrew Kilbride. For. Councillor Graham Lawman. For. Councillor Stephen Legg. For. Councillor Malcolm Longley. For. Councillor Arthur McCutcheon is absent. Councillor John McGee. Against. Councillor Alan Matthews. For. Councillor Andy Mercer. For. Councillor Jill Mercer. For. Councillor Dennis Meredith. Against. Councillor Ian Morris. For. Councillor Sandra Naden Hawley. For. Councillor Steve Osborne. For. Councillor Bill Parker. For. Councillor Suresh Patel. For. Councillor Victoria Perry. For. Councillor Anjona Roy. Against. Councillor Sam Rumans. For. Councillor Adil Sadigov is absent. Councillor Bob Scott. Against. Councillor Mick Scrimshaw. Against. Councillor Judy Shepherd. For. Councillor Chris Smith-Haynes. For. Councillor Jason Smithers. For. Councillor Chris Stamborough. Abstain. Councillor Danielle Stone. Against. Councillor Winston Strachan. Against. Councillor Michael Tye. For. Councillor Alan Walker. For. And Councillor Malcolm Waters. For. Councillor Malcolm Waters. Councillor Waters. For. Thank you.
Right. For. Against.
There's many.
Right. Would you like a badge?
No, I'm not having it.
You can have it.
I think the Chief Executive
I'll have one for my children then.
Can I pass those along?
Yeah.
Oh, you've got one now. You got enough?
Right. The result is 34 for, 13 against and 1 abstention. The next item is urgent business, which there is none, and there are no exempt items. Can I thank you for attending today and close the meeting and look forward to seeing you all next week.